Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I was about 3 miles into the loop trail when I first noticed the humming. It was just past 5 in the morning. Still pretty dark, but the kind of dark where the sky's starting to turn that deep, early blue. I hike that trail a few times a month when I want to clear my head before work. Never seen more than a few people on it, especially that early. I like it that way. The trail cuts through forest for the first mile or so, then opens into this ridge with a view of the valley below. I'd stopped at the overlook, drank some water, then kept going. It was cold enough that I could see my breath, but not uncomfortably so. Everything felt normal until that sound started. It was low, almost more of a vibration than a sound, like when you stand near a big transformer or an idling diesel engine. Except it wasn't coming from anywhere obvious. No cars, no planes. It wasn't in the ground either. It felt like it was just in the air around me. I paused and looked around, thinking maybe someone had a generator going or something, but there was nothing. Just trees and rock and that same weird hum. It wasn't constant either, it sort of pulsed like a slow rhythm. 3 or 4 seconds on, then a couple off, then back on. I remember checking my phone for a signal. 1 bar, no data. I took a few steps off the trail just to see if the sound changed. It didn't. I even turned in a slow circle, trying to figure out if it was coming from a specific direction. It felt like it was coming from everywhere at once. I stood there for maybe 2 minutes before something moved in the trees to my right. At first, I thought it was a person, the way it stepped out so smoothly, but it was a deer. Big doe, maybe 30 yards off. I froze, just out of habit, but it didn't bolt like they usually do. It didn't move at all. It just stood there, completely still. Legs stiff, ears up, not twitching or blinking. It was staring at something above the tree line, over the ridge I had just come from, not toward me. Not toward the trail. Up. That's when I noticed how quiet it had gotten, like everything. No wind, no birds, not even squirrels or anything. Just that pulsing hum and this deer staring up at nothing. I looked up too. I don't know what I expected. Maybe a drone or a plane, but the sky was empty. No clouds, no lights. Just stars and the faint blue of dawn coming in. The treetops were still. Nothing was moving. The deer didn't look away. I swear it didn't even blink. I watched it for what felt like 5 minutes, just waiting for it to do something. Run, turn its head, flick its tail. But it didn't. That weird frozen posture started to bother me more than the humming, like it was stuck. Or being watched too. Eventually I backed away, real slow, and started walking again. The trail curved back into the woods, and I tried to shake it off. Maybe the deer had been sick or something. Maybe there was a plane way higher up I couldn't see. I kept going, but I was more aware of everything. Every little snap of a twig or rustle of leaves made me stop and look. About 10 minutes later, I came across a small clearing where the trees thin out near a rocky slope. There's a signpost there, just trail markers, and I usually stop there to rest before the last leg. As I stepped into the clearing, the humming got louder. Not painfully loud, but enough to feel it in my chest. The kind of low, dense sound that makes your stomach feel tight. And then the shadows shifted. That's the only way I can describe it. The way the early light was coming in through the trees, it cast long shadows across the clearing like usual. But they moved. Not from wind, not from anything natural. The shapes stayed still, but the light that made them shifted, like something huge had passed between the clearing and the sky. I looked up again. Still nothing, but the sound dropped out all at once. Not faded, just stopped, like someone had flipped a switch. I stayed frozen there, staring at the sky. My ears felt weird, like pressure changes after an elevator ride. And then I heard footsteps behind me. Fast ones, crunching on the gravel path. I turned around quick, but no one was there. I waited, listening, but it didn't repeat. The pressure in my ears lingered for a minute or two, then went back to normal. At that point, I seriously debated turning around and heading back, but I figured I was already most of the way through. So I kept walking, faster now. I kept glancing back over my shoulder every couple of minutes. I didn't like the feeling of being alone anymore. As I was coming around the last bend before the descent, I passed another clearing, smaller this time. Just a break in the trees where a fallen pine had opened the canopy. That's when I saw another deer. Or I thought it was. It was on the far side, maybe 40 feet away. But it wasn't standing the same way. It was crouched low, belly almost to the ground, legs bent weird. I couldn't tell if it was lying down or trying to move. But its head was up, just like the first one, and it was looking straight up. This time, I didn't look up. I just stood there, watching it, trying to make sense of how it was positioned. Something about it felt off. The limbs looked too long or too straight, like joints were bent the wrong way. The longer I stared, the more unsure I felt that it was even a deer. Then the sound came back, louder this time. Same low humming pulse, but with an edge to it, like interference or static layered over it. I started moving again, not running, but close. I didn't stop until I was past the switchbacks and could see the trailhead parking lot through the trees. I was the only car there. When I got back to the lot, the sound was gone again. Just the normal morning noises, wind in the trees, some distant bird calls. Sun was fully up now, the sky looked completely normal. I sat in the car for a while before leaving. Didn't turn the engine on right away, just sat there and watched the tree line. Nothing followed me out, but when I drove home, I kept checking the rear view the whole way. I saw it the first time on a Monday night. I was driving back from my sister's place just outside of town, maybe around 10:30 or so. There's this stretch of road, Willow Creek Road, that runs past a bunch of farmland. Not a lot of traffic, no street lights, just fence and field on both sides for about a mile. I was coming around the bend where the trees open up, and I noticed this light hovering over one of the fields on the right. At first, I thought it was a drone. It wasn't moving much, just kind of floating there, glowing pale yellow with this weird bluish edge to it. Too high to be farm equipment, too low to be a star or a plane. It didn't blink or flash, just held steady, maybe 20 feet above the ground. It wasn't super bright, didn't hurt to look at, but it had this strange, soft pulse to it, almost like it was breathing. I slowed down without really thinking and pulled over to the side. I watched it for maybe a minute. No sound, no movement. The cows in the field were all bunched up at the far end, standing completely still. That part stuck with me for some reason, just how still they were. Normally they don't care about anything, but they were all staring in the same direction. Not at the light, but away from it. After a while, I kept driving. When I looked back in the mirror, the light was still there, just hovering. The next night, I went back. I don't know why exactly. Curiosity, I guess. I told myself I just wanted to see if it was still there. It was. Same place, same height, just sitting over the field like before. I parked in the same spot and watched for longer this time, maybe 10, 15 minutes. Again, nothing happened. No movement, no noise. It didn't waver, didn't flicker. I even turned my car off at one point to listen. Still nothing. After the third night, I started to feel uneasy. It was always the same. Same time, same place, same glow. It never got closer or farther, never changed shape or color. There's something about that kind of consistency that doesn't feel right when it comes to things in the sky. You expect weather balloons or drones or even stars to shift a little, drift, change with the wind. This thing didn't. On the fourth night, I brought binoculars. Cheap ones from my dad's garage, nothing fancy. I parked again, leaned over the steering wheel, and focused in on it. All I could make out was the shape, round, or maybe a little flattened, like an oval, with that same glow. No propellers, no wings, no lights underneath, no markings. It looked almost too clean, like it wasn't reflecting light so much as making its own. That night I noticed something else. The sound in the car dropped when I pointed the binoculars at it. Like the hum of the engine and the wind just dulled down for a few seconds. I thought I was imagining it, but it happened again when I tried a second time. Just a few seconds of this muffled silence. Then everything went back to normal. I didn't sleep well that night. Kept waking up thinking I heard something in the yard, but it was just the wind, or maybe the cat. I didn't get up to check. By the fifth night, I told myself I wasn't going back, but I did. This time I parked a little closer, down by the gate to the field. There was a dirt path leading in, and I walked maybe 20 feet in with a flashlight. The beam didn't go far, the air felt heavy, and the light just kind of stopped short in the fog that had rolled in. I couldn't see the object anymore from that angle, but I knew it was above me somewhere. I could feel it, like this faint pressure on my chest. The cows weren't there anymore. That spooked me more than I expected. I hadn't seen any trailers or trucks come through during the week. And there weren't tire tracks in the dirt. Just gone. When I turned to go back to the car, the flashlight flickered. Not out completely, just a few stutters. Same with the headlights when I got back in. I didn't stick around that time. I drove off a little faster than I needed to. Friday I stayed home, tried to distract myself with TV, but I kept checking the clock. Around 10:30, the power flickered. Once, then again. Just for a second. Enough to reset the microwave clock. I live 5 miles from that field. Maybe a coincidence. Saturday night, I drove out again. I don't know what I was expecting. I think I just needed to see if it was still there. It wasn't. The light was gone. Nothing in the sky, no glow, no hum. The field was completely dark, and there was this low mist hanging over the grass. I figured maybe I'd missed it, or it had moved on. I sat there for a while anyway, rolled the windows down. The air smelled different, kind of metallic, like when you leave batteries in a drawer too long. There was this faint crackling sound, like static, but I couldn't tell where it was coming from. It wasn't the car. I shut the engine off and it kept going. Real quiet, like it was out in the grass somewhere. I didn't get out that time. The next morning, I drove past on my way into town, and the field looked wrong. From the road, it was hard to tell, but the grass had this grayish tint to it, kind of flat. I pulled over and walked to the fence. The whole field was scorched, not burned exactly. There weren't any blackened spots or ash piles, but everything looked dead. The grass was dry and brittle. The dirt was pale and cracked. No footprints, no tire marks, no animal tracks. Just this big dead space, all the way across, like it had been drained of something. I called the county office that afternoon and asked if they'd done a controlled burn out there. The guy on the phone said no. They hadn't issued any burn permits for that area. He asked if I'd seen smoke, and I told him no, it didn't look burned, just scorched. He didn't seem too interested. There weren't any storms that week, no lightning, no fires, nothing on the news. I checked every day. The farmer never came out to mow it. The cows didn't come back. I've driven past that field maybe a dozen times since during the day. It hasn't grown back. The rest of the area looks fine. Normal green pasture, wildflowers, trees, but that one field's just stayed gray and empty, like it was peeled off the land and put back wrong. I stopped going by at night. I was working the night shift at a tiny FM radio station in western Nebraska. It wasn't glamorous. I wasn't a DJ or anything. Mostly I was there to monitor the equipment, read the weather at the top of the hour, and keep an eye on the automated playlists. We didn't get many listeners after midnight, and honestly, I used to just bring a book or watch movies on my laptop. It was easy money. The station building sat about 2 miles outside of town, just off a county road, surrounded by cornfields. We shared the lot with the tall transmission tower, and aside from the red safety lights blinking up top, there weren't any lights around at all. It got seriously dark out there. This happened in October, 2 years ago. It was a Thursday night around 1:30 a.m. I was alone, like always. The playlist was running smooth, no weather alerts, nothing on the scanner. I was reading, I think, and half asleep when the interference started. It wasn't static. That's the first thing. I know what regular static or signal bleed sounds like. You hear it sometimes if someone parks a crappy truck too close to the tower, or when one of our older automation systems glitches out. This wasn't that. It was more like something was pushing in through the broadcast, not overlapping it, but replacing it. Just for a second. The music, it was some alt-country track, just dropped out in the middle of a chorus. Dead silence for maybe half a second. Then this garbled voice came on, real distorted, like it had been passed through bad reverb or compression too many times. I couldn't tell if it was male or female. The voice said the same thing 3 times. It wasn't loud, just kind of flat and toneless, like someone talking through a wall underwater. I couldn't make it out at first. It played once, glitchy, broken, then again, clearer. The 3rd time I caught it. They're already here. Then the song kicked back in like nothing had happened. I sat there for a second, just staring at the board. I thought maybe I'd imagined it. But then the phone rang, the internal line. It was Carl, one of our engineers. He lived a couple towns over and had a scanner rig that monitored our feed. He usually didn't call unless something was seriously wrong. He just said, "What the hell was that?" I told him I didn't know. I said I hadn't touched anything. He told me to pull the log and check the automation files. I did. Everything looked normal. The song hadn't skipped in the system. No interruptions were logged. The audio chain was clean. Carl asked if the emergency alert system had triggered. It hadn't. There was no EAS tone, no pre-tone burst, nothing in the buffer. He sounded confused more than anything. I asked if he'd recorded it. He hadn't. He said he was going to remote into the server and see what he could find. We hung up. I replayed the last few minutes through the monitor feed. Nothing. No glitch, no voice. Just the song, playing all the way through like it was supposed to. That made me feel weird, like I dreamed it, even though Carl heard it too. About 10 minutes later, Carl called again. He said he couldn't find anything unusual in the logs or the server buffers. Said it looked like there'd never been a drop in the feed at all. And I asked if it could have been a pirate broadcast or bleed-in from another station. He said not likely. We were on a clear channel, low power, middle of nowhere. No crosstalk, no overlapping signals. Nothing in that range should have been able to override us. I didn't have an answer, and neither did he. He told me to make a note of it, save the logs anyway, and keep an ear out for a repeat. That was it. He sounded tired. I sat there for a while just listening to the next few tracks, half expecting it to happen again. It didn't. The rest of the shift was quiet. Next morning, I stayed a bit late so I could talk to Ken, the morning guy. I figured if Carl hadn't caught the audio, maybe someone else had heard it live. But Ken hadn't gotten any calls or emails. None of our 6 regular listeners, and I'm not exaggerating, we literally averaged 6 after midnight, had reached out. I played back the logs for him, trying to prove it. Of course, nothing was there, just the song, normal levels, no drops. He laughed a little and said, "You sure you didn't nod off?" I didn't even bother arguing. Later that week, I asked Carl again if he'd found anything. He just said, "Still nothing. Ghost in the machine, I guess." He didn't sound like he believed it, though. That should have been it, just a weird one-off. But that weekend, I came in for another night shift and found something that bugged me even more. Every shift, we have to fill out a quick checklist. Transmitter levels, signal quality, that sort of thing. We keep the sheets on a clipboard next to the main board. When I picked it up to sign mine, I noticed something scribbled on the back of the previous night's sheet. In pencil, faint, hurried. Someone had written, "Heard it too. Don't talk about it over the air." That was it. No signature. I checked the schedule. Nobody had been on shift since noon. That message shouldn't have been there. I asked Ken the next morning if he'd seen it. He just shrugged and said he hadn't. I showed him the clipboard and the writing. He looked a little uncomfortable and said, "Maybe Carl messing with you?" I asked Carl that afternoon. He swore he hadn't been out there since we talked on the phone. Said the handwriting didn't look like his anyway. A couple nights later during my shift, I started hearing these little clicks in the headphones. Not loud, just barely there. At first I thought it was my cord or maybe one of the output jacks, but it kept happening even when I switched stations on the monitor, always just before the top of the hour. 3 little clicks, like tapping a fingernail against glass. I ran a diagnostic on the board. Everything checked out. No loose connections, no shorts. It didn't show up on the logs. It didn't go out on the broadcast either. I checked the delay feed. I stopped telling people about it after a while. Felt stupid repeating myself. Then about 2 weeks after that first interference, I had one last weird thing happen. I was pulling into the station lot just before midnight. I had the headlights off because the driveway loops in from the back, and I didn't want to blind the day guy on his way out. As I rounded the bend, my headlights lit up the base of the transmission tower. There was a person standing there. Just standing, maybe 10 feet from the chain link fence, not moving, facing the tower. No car around, no flashlight, no equipment. I slowed way down. They didn't turn or react at all. I rolled my window down and called out, "You okay out there?" Nothing. I pulled around to the front of the building, parked, and went inside. grabbed the flashlight from the equipment locker, and went back out. They were gone. I checked all around the building, even out into the corn past the fence. Nothing. No tracks. No sound. The weirdest part? The little gate in the fence was unlatched. We always kept it locked. I locked it myself the night before. That was the last time anything like that happened. The voice never came back. The clicks stopped a few days later. The rest of the fall and winter were completely normal. Every now and then, I'll still think about that voice, how flat and empty it sounded, like it wasn't meant to be heard. It was like it was saying something out loud that we weren't supposed to catch. I didn't even check the camera right away. That was the weird part. I'd set it up mostly out of habit. I've got 5 trail cams around my property, some for deer, some just because I like knowing what's out there. We've got coyotes, the occasional bear, nothing unusual. I live alone just outside of Winchester, Virginia. Couple wooded acres, not remote, but quiet enough. My nearest neighbor's about half a mile off. I set the camera on the backside of the woods near an old game trail that cuts past a fallen oak. It doesn't get much traffic anymore. I hadn't pulled the card for a few weeks. It was February, cold, and I wasn't expecting much movement. That night I'd been inside watching a movie when the power flickered. Not long, maybe a second or two, just enough to kick off the TV and reset the router. I looked out the kitchen window and noticed something odd, just a glow through the trees. Not moving, not flickering like a fire, just this pale light, like someone had set up a lantern in the woods. It didn't make sense. I walked out to the back deck, and the light was gone. No sound, no wind. Dead still out there. It was around 2 a.m., and the snow was fresh, maybe an inch that fell earlier that evening. I figured maybe headlights had bounced weird off the trees or something. Nothing else seemed off. I didn't think about it again until Sunday afternoon. I was clearing out old footage from the trail cams and got to the one by the fallen oak. There was a motion clip time-stamped the night the power had flickered, 2:03 a.m. At first it looked like nothing, just the trees, the snow, some faint branches swaying. Then this shape drifted across the frame. I don't know what else to call it. It wasn't an animal, wasn't a person. It didn't walk or run or fly, it just moved through. It wasn't solid. That was the part that made my skin crawl. It gave off light, very soft white-blue light, but it didn't have edges. It looked like a stretched balloon underwater, flickering slightly, like heat above falling. The trees lit up as it passed. Not just a camera artifact, it was clearly casting light. You could see the shadows move on the trunks, the snow glowing under it. It passed through the center of the frame in less than 2 seconds, then gone. I replayed it probably a dozen times, slowed it down. There was no sound on the camera, but I strained to hear anyway, like maybe I'd missed something. It didn't touch anything, didn't disturb snow, just moved in a straight line from the left side to the right and vanished into the woods. What struck me was the direction. It had been moving toward my house. That was the last clip recorded that night. The camera didn't pick up anything else until 2 days later. A squirrel in daylight. I left the footage alone for a bit, didn't even mention it to anyone. It just unsettled me, more than I expected. A few nights later, I was out in the shed and heard something odd. Not a noise exactly, more like a pressure shift, like when you're driving and the air changes in a tunnel. It lasted a few seconds. I stepped outside to listen, and the woods were completely silent. No wind, no owls, not even the usual creaks from the trees, just silent and still. I walked around to where the camera had picked up that shape. Nothing looked different. Same logs, same patchy snow. I stood there for a while, then went back in. I didn't sleep much that night. The next evening, I checked the camera again. Another clip had been recorded. This one was weirder, if that's possible. Same time, just after 2 a.m., same faint motion alert. But when I watched it, there was nothing there. No animals, no branches moving. But the trees lit up again. Same angle, same pale light sweeping across from left to right. But this time the source wasn't visible. Just the light. Like something was moving behind the camera and shining forward, but the shape never entered the frame. The trees cast long shadows toward the lens as if something bright had passed close behind. But the camera's motion sensor still triggered. That made my stomach turn a bit. The thing, whatever it was, had passed behind the camera this time. Closer to the house, I went out the next day to inspect it. There were no footprints. Snow had fallen again the night before, just a light dusting, but not enough to cover tracks completely, and nothing else had set off the camera. The battery was full, the lens was clean. That night, I stayed up, made coffee, sat by the back window with the lights off. I kept checking the trees for any movement, any glow. But nothing happened. Around 2:10, I did hear a very faint crackling sound, like twigs snapping under something light, but it only lasted a few seconds. I opened the back door and stepped onto the deck. Again, no wind, no movement. Just cold air and a faint metallic smell, like rain on old wiring. I didn't go far, just stood there listening until I couldn't feel my fingers. Then I went back inside. The next morning, the trail camera was off. I figured maybe the batteries finally died, but when I took it inside and opened the panel, they were fine. Full charge. The card was still inside. I turned it back on and it worked immediately. But there were no new clips. I replaced the batteries anyway and set it back up. That night, nothing. The next night, nothing. Then 3 days later, a new video appeared. Same time, 2:03 a.m. This one had sound. I didn't think the camera even had audio. It was cheap, an older model, but this clip had faint background noise. Not much, but enough to catch something strange. A kind of low-frequency hum, barely above a whisper, like someone humming a single note under their breath. It got louder as the clip progressed. The video itself showed the same light sweeping through the trees, but again, no shape, just illumination moving from left to right. The hum peaked right as the light faded, then silence again. I brought the clip into editing software to clean it up, boost the sound. There was nothing under the hum, no animal sounds, no wind, just that steady, low tone. I checked other clips from the same day, no sound on those, not even a hint. I haven't caught anything new since then. It's been over a month. The snow's melted. I still check the camera every few days, it works. Records squirrels, raccoons, the occasional deer, but no lights, no hum, no shapes. The woods seem normal again, but I've stopped going out there after dark. It started the second week of January during that stretch of winter where everything feels kind of hollow. I was 17 and still living at home, third floor bedroom, facing the backyard. Nothing but trees past the property line. We had a motion light on the garage, but it was always getting set off by raccoons or wind. I didn't think much about that light anymore. The first night it happened, I was half asleep, scrolling on my phone under the covers. It was almost 2 a.m., quiet except for the hum of the baseboard heater and the occasional gust of wind hitting the window. Then I heard this tapping. 3 short taps, evenly spaced, not loud, just sharp and precise, like a knuckle on glass. I froze. I didn't move, didn't even breathe for a second. My bed was up against the wall opposite the window, so I had a clear view. The blinds were closed, but the way they flexed slightly inward told me the outside air was pressing against them. I waited. A few seconds passed. Then it came again. Tap, 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 same rhythm. My first thought was a tree branch, but there's nothing tall enough to reach my window from the backyard, and definitely not that high up. I live on the 3rd floor, technically the attic. My dad had finished it a few years before, so I could have some space. There's nothing up there but my room and the little staircase. I sat up and just stared at the blinds. I didn't want to look, but I also kind of had to. I eased out of bed and walked over real slow. I didn't pull them up, I just tilted the slats enough to peek through. There was nothing there. Just snow-covered yard, trees in the distance, and the orange glow of the neighbor's porch light. No animals, no branches, no person. I stood there for a while, waiting to see if anything moved. Nothing did. In the morning, I went outside before school. We'd had fresh snow that night, maybe 2 inches. The ground below my window was completely undisturbed. No prints, no scuffs, nothing. Just clean snow, smooth and even, all the way from the garage to the tree line. I didn't say anything to my parents. It felt weird even bringing it up. The next few nights were quiet. I started to think maybe it was just something in the house settling, or ice cracking. But then Saturday came. Same time, a little after 2. I was up late gaming with a friend, headset off for a break, sitting in my chair near the window. I'd just opened a soda when I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. This time it was closer, sharper, like it was just inches away. I spun around and stared at the blinds. My heart was pounding. I didn't get up. I just sat there holding my drink, waiting. About 30 seconds later, it came again. 3 taps, same rhythm. Not frantic, not random, deliberate. I stood up and yanked the blinds all the way open. Still nothing. Just snow. The backyard was quiet and still. The garage light hadn't come on, which meant nothing had moved across the yard in the last few minutes. And again, no prints. I slept downstairs on the couch that night, didn't even make an excuse. Sunday morning, I went out again and looked for anything. Scratches on the siding, icicles, fallen branches. Nothing. I even knocked on my own window from the inside, trying to match the sound. It was the same. Hollow, quick, like someone's knuckle. But there was no way anyone could be tapping up there without a ladder or something to stand on. And there were no drag marks or signs of equipment in the snow. That night, I stayed up with the light on. I tried to ignore it, told myself it wasn't going to happen again. I kept the blinds open this time. At around 2:20, the tapping came back. I was looking straight at the window when it happened, but I didn't see anything. Just the sound. Same 3 taps, like always. I walked over slowly and pressed my forehead to the glass, cupping my hands around the sides to block the reflection. The snow below looked untouched. The porch light flicked on behind me, casting this long shadow out across the yard, and I flinched, but there was no movement outside. I didn't sleep at all that night. Just lay there, watching the window until the sun came up. Monday after school, I asked my dad if we had any wildlife cameras or trail cams. He used to hunt a little and had a few old ones in the garage. I played it off like I wanted to see if any deer were coming close to the house, maybe use it for a school project or something. He didn't question it. I set one up inside my room, pointing out the window, just behind the blinds. That night, I made sure everything was recording. I even left my light off and stayed under the covers with earbuds in, pretending to sleep. I heard the taps again, 3, like clockwork, around 2:10 a.m. This time they were a little slower, not hesitant, just drawn out, like whoever or whatever it was knew I was listening. I didn't look. I didn't move. I just lay there counting in my head, waiting to see if it would come again. It didn't. In the morning, I checked the camera. Nothing. It recorded all night, caught some headlights from the street, and the light on the garage flickering on once around midnight. But no movement, no figures, and definitely no tapping. That's what really got under my skin. Not that something was out there, but that it somehow wasn't showing up at all. Like it knew where the blind spots were. Or it wasn't something the camera could catch. The next night, I set up my phone too, pointing at the window from a different angle. Both devices on, both recording. Same result. The taps came at 2:17 a.m., but nothing showed up on either video. I even tried syncing the audio. I couldn't hear the taps on the playback at all, like they hadn't happened. By Thursday, I started feeling sick. Not like the flu or anything, just off, dizzy, unfocused. My ears rang on and off all day. I felt like I was being watched constantly, even at school. I was short with people, couldn't sit still. I kept checking over my shoulder like something was following me. I started sleeping downstairs again without saying why. That Friday, everything stopped. No tapping, no noise, no weirdness. The backyard stayed quiet. The snow melted a little from the sun during the day, but I still checked it each morning. No prints, no disturbances. The garage light didn't flicker. My ears stopped ringing. I moved back up to my room on Sunday. I kept the blinds closed and didn't set up the camera again. Whatever it was, it felt like it had moved on. But even now, when I wake up in the middle of the night, especially if it's windy, I find myself staring at the window, waiting, listening. The train stopped about halfway between Leeville and Aldridge, right where the track cuts through that patch of woods. I was in the second car, reading on my phone with my earbuds in, when the lights flickered and we started slowing down. At first I figured it was just a regular delay, happens all the time on that line. But then we came to a full stop and the lights dimmed to that emergency level, just enough to see everyone's faces. A couple people around me took out their earbuds too, looking up. Nobody said anything right away. Then, this guy in a suit up near the front leaned into the aisle and asked if anyone else's phone had just lost service. I checked mine. No bars, no data. I tried toggling airplane mode a few times, but nothing came back. That was weird, but not impossible. That area's always been a dead zone. We sat there for maybe 10 minutes. A few people started getting restless. One guy stood up to see if he could find a conductor, but he came back a minute later and said the doors wouldn't open. He wasn't panicking, just annoyed. Everyone else just kind of shrugged it off. We all thought the train would start up again any second. The fog started rolling in around then. I noticed it out the window. At first it looked normal, patchy, low to the ground, but then it got thick, real thick, fast. Within 5 minutes, you couldn't see more than a few feet past the tracks. It just sort of swallowed everything up. That's when people started pulling their phones again to take pictures, but most of them gave up when the photos came out blank or all washed out. Then the lights cut out completely. Just for a few seconds, but it was long enough to hear everyone shift and murmur. When they came back on, we were still just sitting there, dead quiet outside. Not even birds. You'd expect something, but there was nothing. It was like the fog muffled everything. The first person who saw something was a woman sitting across from me. She was quiet the whole ride, maybe mid-40s, work badge still clipped to her blouse. She leaned forward and tapped on the glass, kind of gently, like she thought someone was out there. I looked over, and she whispered something like, "Do you see them?" I turned to look. At first, I didn't see anything. Then my eyes adjusted. There were shapes in the fog, tall ones, thin, spread out, maybe 6 or 7 of them, just barely visible. Like silhouettes, but off somehow. I thought it might be trees, but there's no trees that close to the tracks there. And they weren't there before. They didn't move, just stood there, too still and too tall. At least 8 feet, maybe more. Long arms, or what looked like arms, hanging straight down. Someone a few rows behind us gasped, and that started the whispering. You could hear it ripple through the car. People pointing, quietly asking each other if they were seeing the same thing. A guy near the back pulled his phone out and started filming. I remember the red record light blinking. He zoomed in on the window and muttered something like, "What the hell is that?" The figures were still there. No movement, not even a twitch, just lined up facing the train. One of the kids a few seats up started crying softly. Her mom told her it was okay, that it was just construction workers in the fog, but no one believed that. There were no lights, no vests, no equipment, and the fog was too thick. You couldn't fake those shapes. After a few more minutes, one of the figures, the one closest to us, shifted. It didn't step forward exactly, but it got closer. Like one moment it was 20 feet out, and then it was 10, still not moving, just closer. That's when people really started freaking out. A couple of passengers went to the front door, banging on it, shouting for the conductor. Someone said the intercom wasn't working. No announcements, no explanation. We were locked in, just stuck. A woman stood up and tried to open the emergency exit, but it wouldn't budge. She said it was jammed. A man in the front car tried pulling down the window, and that didn't work either. Everything was unresponsive, like the whole train had shut down. We were just sitting in a tube, sealed up tight with those things outside. I looked back out the window. The one that had moved was gone. The others were still there, still watching. A guy next to me whispered, "Where'd it go?" No one answered. Then the lights flickered again and came back up brighter, normal bright, and the train lurched forward. Just like that. Like nothing had happened. We rolled slowly at first, then picked up speed, and the fog thinned almost immediately. Within 2 minutes, we were pulling into Aldridge Station like everything was fine. People poured out onto the platform. Everyone was talking, some quietly, some loud and nervous. The conductor was already out of his booth, walking up and down like he didn't know what the hell had happened. He kept saying there'd been a systems glitch, that we'd lost power briefly, but everything was okay now. Someone asked about the fog and the shapes. I think it was the guy who filmed. The conductor looked at him like he was nuts. He said he hadn't seen anything. A few of us stayed behind and asked if we could talk to someone official. I don't know what we expected. Eventually, a transit cop came by and said they'd review the cameras and log the event, but there was no danger, no injuries, so we should go on our way. The next day, someone who'd been on the train posted screenshots from the CCTV feed. They'd gotten them through a friend who worked in the control room or something. The weird thing was, you could see all of us in the car, pointing at the windows, reacting. But outside, nothing. Just the fog. No figures, no shapes, not even shadows. There were 4 different angles, and in every one, it looked like we were losing our minds over empty air. The guy who filmed with his phone posted his video too. Same thing. He was aiming right at them, talking about what he saw, but the footage was just blank white fog. I don't take that line much anymore. If I have to go that way, I drive. Just seems easier. Safer, somehow. I asked around a bit, tried to find the woman who first pointed them out, or the guy in the suit who lost service. Nobody seemed to know who they were. I'm not even sure they got off at Aldridge with the rest of us. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if the train hadn't started back up. If we'd stayed there, with the fog closing in, and whatever those things were waiting just past it. Waiting for what? I don't know. I was hiking alone in the mountains late November, just before the first real snowstorm of the season hit. I'd planned a short overnight trip to clear my head. Nothing complicated, just some time out in the quiet. The weather forecast said light snow with winds picking up after dark, but I wasn't too worried. I'd done plenty of hikes in worse weather. By late afternoon, the sky had thickened and the first flakes started falling. I was about halfway back to my car when the wind really kicked up and the snow got heavier fast. The trail markers got harder to spot, and I realized the storm was worse than I thought. I stopped to check my phone for GPS, but the battery was low and signal was spotty at best. The cold was creeping in, and I knew I had to find shelter, or at least somewhere to wait it out. I kept moving, trying to stay on the trail, but the snow was blurring everything. I was bundled up in layers, but the wind cut right through them, and my fingers were already numb. At some point, I lost the trail completely. I walked for maybe 10 minutes, but everything looked the same. Trees coated in snow, heavy gray skies. I stopped, trying to get my bearings. I thought about turning back, but the storm was thickening, and I didn't want to wander blindly. Then I noticed something odd. The air just ahead of me felt different. Warmer, like a bubble of heat in the cold. It wasn't a huge difference, maybe just a few degrees, but enough that I could tell with numb fingers and everything. I paused and took a few careful steps forward. Above that spot, there was a faint, flickering glow. It was pale, kind of bluish-white, and it wasn't steady like a campfire or flashlight. It shimmered, almost like it was breathing. I blinked a few times to clear my eyes, thinking it might be a trick from the swirling snow or my tired brain messing with me. I stepped closer, and the warmth grew stronger. The glow faded a bit as I approached, like it was retreating or dissolving. I reached out with a gloved hand, but there was nothing there, just cold air again. I looked around, but the snow kept falling, and there were no footprints or signs that anyone else had been nearby. I wasn't sure if I'd imagined the whole thing, but the warmth was definitely real. I stood there for a moment, trying to figure out what it could be. I checked my watch. It was almost 5 p.m., and the light outside was fading fast. The storm was picking up again, so I started walking slowly, hoping to find shelter, or at least a tree I could lean against to wait it out. The warmth patch disappeared completely, and the snow swirled thick and cold around me. A little while later, I thought I heard something. A low hum, almost mechanical, but distant and muffled by the wind. It wasn't loud, just enough to make me stop and listen. The snow and wind masked it quickly, but it stayed with me, that quiet hum, like something alive but not natural. I kept moving, but I was disoriented, and the trees all looked the same. Every so often, the wind would die down for a second, and I'd swear I saw that flickering glow again, just out of the corner of my eye. When I turned to look directly, nothing was there. The cold was getting worse, and I was starting to shake, even with all my clothes. I tried to keep moving toward where I thought the trail should be, but after a while, I realized I didn't recognize anything anymore. The snow was deeper, the wind louder. At one point, I stopped behind a large pine, trying to catch my breath. The snow had piled up on its branches, making everything around me quieter. I looked up and saw the faintest flicker of light between the trees, the same bluish-white glow. It wasn't bright, just enough to notice if you weren't expecting it. I stared at it for a few seconds, feeling a mix of confusion and unease. The light pulsed gently, like it was trying to get my attention or maybe just watching me. I tried to call out, but my voice was swallowed by the storm. Then I heard a sound, soft footsteps crunching in the snow, but they weren't close. I spun around, trying to see where they came from, but all I could see was the white blur of snow and dark tree trunks. I started walking faster, not toward the light this time, but away from it, hoping to find the trail or at least some sign of civilization. The footsteps stopped. The wind got louder again, and the snow fell thick. I don't know how long I wandered. My fingers were frozen, and my face stung from the cold. The storm started to ease up a little, but I was exhausted and barely able to keep moving. Finally, I saw something, the faint orange glow of a cabin's window through the trees. Relief hit me hard. I stumbled toward it, feeling the warmth from the building before I even got close. I knocked on the door, and a man inside opened it. I must have looked like a mess, but he didn't say much, just let me in without questions. He gave me hot tea and a blanket, and I sat there, shaking, trying to make sense of what had happened. I told him about the glow and the warm spot in the snow, but he just nodded slowly, like he'd heard stories like that before. He didn't offer an explanation. The next morning, when I went outside, the snow around the cabin was undisturbed except for my tracks coming in. No sign of anything strange. The place where I felt the warm air and saw the flicker was just regular snow and cold wind. I left soon after, driving back to town. I didn't tell many people because I wasn't sure what to make of it myself. The glow, the warmth, the footsteps, none of it added up. Every now and then, when it snows and the wind is just right, I remember that patch of warm air and the fading light. It's like it was there, but not really. Something out of place in the middle of the storm. I don't know what it was, and maybe I never will. We were driving through this stretch of highway in northern New Mexico, just past the high desert where the land really opens up and there's almost nothing but scrub and rocks for miles. My girlfriend Jess and I had been on a road trip for a few days trying to get away from everything. It was late afternoon, the sky clear and big, the kind of place where you expect to see a ton of stars later on. We stopped at a turnout just because it was quiet, and Jess pulled out her phone to snap some photos. She was into photography, even if it was just with her phone, and she liked to capture the light out there, how the rocks caught the sun. I had my phone too, mostly just for music and GPS, but I took some pictures as well. We were both messing around, shooting the landscape, taking a few selfies, nothing fancy. Then we got back in the car and kept driving. The road was mostly empty, nothing but us and a couple of trucks far behind. I remember the radio cutting out briefly, some static, then nothing but silence. Jess looked over and said the cell service was spotty, which wasn't a surprise out there. The sky was starting to stretch wide with that golden light you get just before sunset. After a while, we noticed the landscape felt different, like we had driven into a place that didn't quite belong. The road was the same, but the hills looked oddly flat, the colors muted. There was this strange quiet too, not just no traffic, but the usual background sounds gone. No wind, no birds, no insects. It was weird, but I thought maybe we just hadn't noticed before. Jess kept taking pictures. She said the light was unreal, like nothing she'd seen before. I remember her laughing softly, saying it was the best spot we'd found on the whole trip. I took some more pictures too, but I was starting to feel off, like something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. We talked a bit less as the sun sank lower. I remember glancing at my phone and noticing the battery was draining fast, even though I hadn't used it much. Jess's phone was the same, which was weird. We joked that the desert was sucking the power out or something. After an hour or so, we stopped at another turnout, this one smaller and dustier. Jess went to check her photos, scrolling through them. She frowned. "Hey, what the hell?" she said. I looked over, and every photo from the last 2 hours was just black. Not blurry, not darkened, just completely black squares. Not a single image showed anything. No sky, no rocks, no us. I pulled out my phone and checked. Same thing. All black images for that whole stretch. Even the selfies we'd taken together. We tried taking new pictures right there. They worked fine. The screen showed exactly what the camera was seeing: the dusty road, the faded grass, the mountains in the distance. We both took shots, looked at them, everything normal. But the ones from the previous 2 hours, all blank. That's when I noticed something else. I checked the time on my phone. It was almost an hour earlier than I thought it should be. Jess looked at hers and said the same thing. Our phones were out of sync. We thought the drive was maybe 2 hours, but the phones showed we'd been driving for about 3. I figured maybe a glitch or some kind of network error. The roads we were on were empty. GPS signal might have been spotty. But I'm not a tech expert, so I wasn't sure. We got back in the car and drove toward the nearest town, trying not to think about the black photos or the time difference. The silence outside was still there, thick and heavy, like the world had gone quiet just for us. At one point, I caught a glimpse in the side mirror, something pale and shimmering behind the trees. I looked again, but it was gone. Jess said she saw it too, but couldn't say what it was. A trick of the light, maybe, or a reflection. The road eventually curved and things started to look normal again. Birds chirped. The wind picked up. We stopped at a gas station and checked the phones again. The clocks had caught up, the cameras worked, and the photos taken from then on were perfectly normal. We didn't mention the black photos or the time gap to anyone. We're not really into that stuff, and it felt weird to bring up. A few days later, I tried to upload the photos to my computer. The black squares wouldn't open. I looked for hidden files or metadata, but there was nothing. It was like the images never existed. I keep thinking about it sometimes, about that stretch of road, the silence, the photos that showed nothing. It's like a part of the trip disappeared. We were there, but something about it wasn't right. I don't know what it was, but I don't think I want to find out. It was a Tuesday night, early spring. I remember because the windows were open and it was just warm enough not to need a jacket inside. I live out on about 12 acres just outside of town. Nothing fancy, old farmhouse, gravel driveway, big backyard that slopes down toward a tree line. You can see a long way out here. No streetlights, no neighbors in sight, just stars and silence most nights. I'd finished dinner and was cleaning up the kitchen. It was around 9, maybe a little after. The sky was already good and dark. I went out onto the porch with a glass of iced tea and sat on the swing like I usually do. The air smelled like cut grass and damp dirt. Real still. No wind, no crickets, nothing. That's what struck me first. The silence. I didn't notice it at the time because it didn't feel strange at first, but later I realized how quiet it had been. Like the whole yard was holding its breath. I was just staring up, spacing out, like I do. Then I noticed something was different. I don't know how to explain it exactly. My eyes weren't focusing right. There was a spot in the sky that seemed flatter, like a patch that didn't shift when I blinked or moved my head. It was directly above the house. At first I thought maybe it was a cloud, but there weren't any that night. You could see everything, every star, except in that spot. It wasn't black exactly, just empty. I stood up off the swing and took a few steps out into the yard. I tilted my head back and stared at it. It was a triangle, long, thin, with rounded corners. Just sitting there, not moving. No sound, no lights. And the weirdest part was I could still see the stars through it. Sort of. Like they were being projected or mimicked, but slightly off. One of the stars inside the shape blinked out for a split second, then came back. That's how I saw the outline. It didn't block out the sky, it didn't cast a shadow, but it was there. I stood there staring at it for maybe 30 seconds, not breathing, not moving. Then I blinked, and it was gone. Just not there anymore. No movement, no fading. 1 second it was overhead, and the next the sky was normal again. I stayed out there for a while, trying to figure out if I'd imagined it. I walked around the yard. I even looked at the ground, thinking maybe there'd be some kind of imprint or disturbance. Nothing. I went inside eventually, but I didn't sleep much. Every sound made me jump. I kept checking the windows. Around 3 a.m., the power went out for about 5 minutes. No wind, no storm, just off and back on. My phone battery drained fast that night too. I plugged it in when I went to bed, and it was at 9% when I checked it at 4:30. 2 days later, I found one of my outdoor motion lights on the back shed had shattered. No sign of impact, no rocks or anything. just the bulb cracked in its housing. I didn't hear anything when it would have happened. I didn't tell anyone at first. Then about a week later, I mentioned it to a guy I know from the feed store. Older guy, lives about 4 miles down the road. He looked at me real quiet for a second and then said, "You see it too?" I asked what he meant, and he just shook his head and said never mind. He wouldn't talk about it after that. A few nights after that, I woke up around 2 a.m. with this weird pressure in my ears. Not pain exactly, more like when you drive up a mountain and your ears don't pop right. I got up, walked around, checked the house. Everything looked normal. I stepped outside just to make sure the dogs hadn't knocked something over, and it hit me again. The silence. That unnatural kind where you can't hear anything, not even your own footsteps, right? I didn't see anything that time, but I felt like something was there. I don't know where. Just somewhere above. Watching. I stood outside for maybe 10 minutes, waiting for something to move, but it didn't. Eventually, I went back in. The pressure in my ears faded after a couple hours. Since then, nothing else like that's happened. No more shapes in the sky. But I notice little things now. The way the dogs sometimes bark at corners of the yard where there's nothing. The way my porch light flickers every so often, even after I replace the bulb. My phone still dies fast when I'm out in the yard too long at night. I've gone out on the porch every clear night since then, looking, haven't seen it again. But I keep thinking about how it didn't move, didn't hum, didn't shine, just sat there, wrong, like a piece of the sky that didn't belong. Like something pretending to be nothing. I was out behind the cabin that night because the sky was clearer than I'd seen it in years. No moon, no haze, just cold, sharp stars across the whole sky. I'd been up there a couple days already. My uncle's place in northern Arizona, way out past where the paved road ends. It's not much, just a one-room cabin, a fire pit, and a deck that looks out toward the hills. No neighbors, no cell signal, and barely enough power to charge a phone if the generator's been running. I'd brought my tripod and a little camera because I've been getting into night photography, mostly just long exposures of stars and tree lines, that kind of thing. Nothing serious. That night, I set up around 11:30, bundled in 2 jackets with a thermos and some music playing low on a Bluetooth speaker. It was below freezing, but I didn't care. The sky was incredible. Around 1 a.m., I noticed something strange in the southeast corner of the sky. There was this little grouping of lights. Not stars exactly, more like a cluster of pale dots, maybe 6 or 7 of them. They weren't blinking or anything, and they were too dim to be satellites. They were also way too high up to be aircraft. They looked like they were sitting completely still at first, but when I started paying closer attention, I realized they were moving, very, very slowly. At first I thought I was imagining it, but I lined up my camera and started a time lapse to track their motion. Over the next 10 or 15 minutes, I watched the lights shift formation, not in a smooth arc like stars rotating across the sky, and not in a straight line like something flying past. They were changing positions relative to each other, like points on a grid being rearranged. 2 moved apart slightly, while another one seemed to drift closer to the center. There was no sound. None. No wind either. It had died down after midnight. Just silence and those faint lights shifting like they were working something out between them. I checked my camera's screen and saw they were visible in the playback, but faint. That gave me a weird kind of validation, like I wasn't imagining it. I turned the music off and just watched. I don't know how long I stood there, but it felt like maybe 20 minutes. The lights kept rearranging. Always slowly, always with long pauses between shifts. Then one of them blinked out. I actually rubbed my eyes thinking maybe I'd looked away and missed it moving, but I hadn't. It hadn't drifted off or flown away. It was just there 1 second and gone the next. No trail, no fade, just gone. About a minute later, another one disappeared. Same thing, instant. Not in the same spot as the first either. It was one of the outer ones. Then 2 more vanished in quick succession. That left just 3 of them, sitting in a rough triangle. I backed up a little and kept glancing at the camera, but the screen had gone dark. It had stopped recording. I didn't remember it running out of battery or filling the card. I walked over to check it, but it was still on, just stuck. The shutter hadn't closed, but the image had frozen. While I was fiddling with the controls, I looked up and saw another one vanish. Now there were only two. Something about that moment made my chest go tight. It wasn't dramatic, just a kind of quiet wrongness. The way they disappeared didn't follow anything I understood. They weren't falling, fading, or blinking. It was like watching pieces of sky just stop existing. I stood there, camera in hand, staring up at the last two lights. They didn't move anymore. They just hung there like they were waiting. Then the sixth one disappeared. The last light stayed up there by itself for a long time. I don't know how long. My watch had fogged over and my phone was inside the cabin charging. It felt like 10 minutes, maybe more. I just stood in the dark, listening to the absolute stillness of the forest and watching that one faint light sit alone in the sky. Then it disappeared too. I didn't go back inside right away. I stayed on the deck and looked up at the now normal sky, half expecting something else to happen, but it didn't. The stars looked normal again. No movement, no clusters, nothing out of place. I checked the camera one more time and it still wouldn't respond. I had to pull the battery out and restart it. When I got it working again, I went back through the files and found the time lapse, but the last few frames were corrupted. It cut off right before the first light vanished. The rest of the footage was intact. Trees, stars, a few faint clouds. But the part I really cared about wasn't there. I thought about driving into town the next day to check for any air traffic reports or astronomy posts online, but there's no internet up there, and I ended up staying 2 more nights. I didn't see anything else after that, just cold skies and regular stars. I still have the camera file saved, and sometimes I go back to it, trying to adjust the contrast or pull more detail from the lights. But nothing really shows up, just those pale dots barely brighter than the stars around them, and then the video ends. No sound, no reaction from the trees or anything else. It was just quiet. Too quiet. It started around 9 o'clock on a Saturday night. I was sitting on my couch, scrolling through my phone like usual, when suddenly everything flickered. Not just the TV or the lights, but pretty much every electronic thing in my apartment. The lights dimmed for a second, the Wi-Fi cut out, and my phone screen went black for a few seconds before coming back on. I figured it was just a power surge or maybe the wiring acting up in the building, but then I heard this low pulsing sound. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before. It wasn't a beep or a hum. It was almost like a rhythmic pulse, steady and kind of deep. I thought maybe someone was drilling somewhere or some kind of machinery was running nearby, but it wasn't that normal. It was off. I looked out the window and saw a couple of the streetlights flicker, then go back to normal. I texted my neighbor across the hall just to see if he was having the same thing happen. A minute later, he texted back saying his TV cut out too, and his dog was acting weird, restless, whining like he was scared, but without any obvious reason. Then, I started getting messages from a few other neighbors in the building and some from the houses nearby. All of them were describing the same thing. Electronics glitching, lights flickering, phones going dead for a few seconds, and that pulsing noise no one could place. One person said their cat wouldn't stop pacing. Another said their parrot was screaming like crazy. All within the same 10 or 15 minutes. I remember the pulsing sound got louder for a bit, but it never changed pitch or rhythm. It was just this steady throb. I tried recording it with my phone, but the mic didn't pick it up. The recording was just dead silence, which freaked me out even more. How can you hear something, but a phone can't? I went outside for a bit because it felt claustrophobic inside with all the weirdness happening. The street was almost empty, just a few people standing on their porches looking confused, some walking their dogs that didn't seem quite right. The animals all looked tense, ears perked up or tail tucked, but nobody was sure what to make of it. While I was outside, I caught sight of something strange up in the sky. Not like a plane or helicopter, but a faint, glowing shape drifting silently above the trees a few blocks away. It wasn't moving fast, more like it was hovering or gliding. It was hard to tell exactly what it was. Just a dim, shifting light, like a soft ball of white-blue glow. No flashing lights, no sound. I blinked and it was still there, but then it kind of stretched out, almost like it was distorting or melting before it vanished completely. No sudden movement, just gone. That moment was what really unsettled me. There wasn't any noise or other sign of something leaving. It was just not there anymore. I went back inside and noticed my laptop was acting up too. The screen flickered, programs opened and closed on their own, the cursor jumped around like it was possessed or someone was messing with it. I shut it down and unplugged everything electronic in the apartment just to be safe. The pulsing stopped after about 10 minutes and the power seemed to stabilize. Lights stopped flickering, phones worked again, and the animals finally calmed down. But for a while after, there was this heavy feeling like the air was thicker or somehow charged. The next day, I talked to some of the neighbors in person. Most of them had the same story. Weird glitches with their devices, pets acting out, and hearing that strange pulse. Some of the older folks said they never experienced anything like it in all their years living here. Nobody could explain what it was. There was no storm, no power company alerts, no maintenance scheduled. Just this quiet, pulsing sound and those weird glitches. The local news never mentioned anything, and I didn't see any reports of strange weather or electromagnetic disturbances in the area. I still think about it sometimes. The way the sky looked that night with that glowing shape, the way the animals seemed to know something was wrong before anyone else did, and how the electronics went haywire without any warning. No one ever figured out what caused it. And honestly, I'm not sure I want to know. I was coming in for a landing at a small regional airport one evening, about an hour before sunset. The sky was clear, and the whole flight had been uneventful until the final approach. I was flying a single-engine prop plane, nothing fancy, just enough to get me from point A to B. As I lined up with the runway, I glanced out the left window and saw something that threw me off. There was another plane, or at least it looked like one. It was hovering just above the runway, maybe 50 feet up, perfectly still. No movement, no engine noise. It was kind of hard to make out details at first because it was dusk, but the shape was definitely a plane, a small one, with wings and what looked like a tail. At first, I thought maybe the tower had cleared another plane to land, and I hadn't been told, so I radioed in. Ground control, this is Cessna 3571. I have a plane holding just above the runway. Can you confirm? There was a crackle, then the voice came back clear. Cessna 3571. We have no other aircraft on final or in the pattern. Runway is clear for landing. I blinked, checked my instruments, looked back out the window. The shape was still there. It didn't move or change in any way. I started to wonder if I was seeing things or if it was some kind of weird reflection, but the shape's outline was too distinct, too steady, and it definitely wasn't a drone or a balloon or anything I'd seen before. I radioed again. Ground control, you're sure? There's definitely something holding just above the runway. It looks like a plane, but it's not responding. No lights or anything. Negative, Cessna 3571. No traffic on or near the runway. You're cleared to land. I nodded to myself, but I kept staring out the window. The thing was just hovering there, motionless. Then I noticed something else. There was no sound. No engine noise, no wind disturbance, nothing. Just silence. I started my descent carefully. The whole time I had this feeling like I was being watched, but when I glanced away, there was nothing unusual in the cockpit. I tapped the mic again, trying to get someone to confirm what I was seeing, but the tower repeated the same thing. No traffic, runway clear. As I got closer, I noticed the shape started to look less and less like a plane. The edges were kind of blurry, almost like it was shifting or melting into the air around it. It wasn't reflecting light like a solid object either. It was darker than the sky, but not like a shadow, more like an absence of light. I slowed my approach, preparing to go around if needed, but the object didn't move. I figured maybe I should just land and let whoever was on the ground check it out. I touched down smoothly, rolled to a stop near the taxiway, and shut down the engine. As soon as I turned off the radio, I glanced back toward the runway. The shape was gone. No trace, no disturbance, nothing. Curious and a bit unsettled, I walked over to the tower to ask if anyone else had reported seeing anything. The guy in the tower looked at me like I'd lost it. Nope, nothing unusual. We monitor everything, and there were no aircraft at all besides you. I checked with the other pilots on the ground. but nobody else had seen anything either. It was like the thing had only appeared to me. Later, while I was getting my bags, I heard from a mechanic that the security cameras near the runway had footage that was weird, just static for a few minutes during the time I was on final approach. The cameras cut out and came back on with no explanation. I asked if I could see the footage, but the mechanic said it was glitchy and not worth looking at. I kept thinking about the shape, how it wasn't quite a plane, how it hovered perfectly still and silent. It didn't behave like anything mechanical I'd seen. I called the airport the next day, hoping to get a better explanation, but all they said was maybe it was a weather balloon or some kind of optical illusion, but that didn't fit. Balloons don't hover still, and I'm used to flying in weird weather conditions. The whole thing has stuck with me. I don't know what I saw, and I don't expect to ever find out. But every time I fly into that airport, I can't help but look out the window, half expecting that shape to be waiting there again. I was camping alone in this spot I'd never been to before, way out in the woods a few hours from the nearest town. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend to clear my head, no distractions, no one around. I set up my tent just before dark, got my sleeping bag laid out, and turned off my phone because there was no signal anyway. That night, I slept pretty hard until something woke me up. I don't know what time it was, maybe around 2 or 3 in the morning. It was this weird feeling, like the kind you get when you're not quite sure if you're dreaming or awake. I reached over to check my phone, but it was dead. Not just low battery dead, completely off. Strange, because I'd plugged it in before I went to sleep. Then I noticed the tent zipper. Every single zipper on the tent was open about halfway. Not fully unzipped, but just enough to be noticeable, like someone had opened them carefully and then stopped. I froze, trying to tell if I was still dreaming or if this was actually happening. The tent wasn't cold and there was no breeze, so nothing should have made them move on their own. I didn't hear anything outside at first. No footsteps, no animals, nothing. I sat up slowly and unzipped one side of the tent to peek out. The night was really quiet, too quiet, honestly. Usually there'd be some bird or insect noise, but this felt like everything had been muted. Then I saw it. My gear, backpack, water bottle, lantern, even my boots, laid out in the dirt about 10 feet from my tent. But it wasn't just scattered around. It was arranged in this perfect spiral. I mean, every piece was spaced evenly and placed with some kind of purpose. The spiral started small and wound outward, like someone had taken their time to line everything up carefully. I didn't hear or see any footprints in the dirt or grass nearby. I walked around the spiral, looking for tracks, broken twigs, anything that could tell me how this happened. There was nothing. No footprints leading in, no footprints leading out, just my stuff, arranged like some kind of weird art project. I checked my phone again, still dead. I tried turning it on a few times, nothing. I was starting to get this sinking feeling like maybe I wasn't alone out here, but I couldn't hear anything to confirm it. I didn't want to freak out, so I just sat down a few feet from the tent, staring at the spiral, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. After a while, I thought maybe I'd been half asleep and moved the gear myself without remembering. But I know I didn't. I'm too clumsy for that kind of neatness, and there's no way I would have stopped halfway on the zippers and arranged my stuff perfectly outside in the dark. I didn't want to stay out there any longer, but I also didn't want to go back to sleep and wake up with something even stranger waiting. I grabbed my flashlight and started packing my gear up, keeping an eye on the tree line. Still no sound, no movement. As I packed, I noticed something else. The spiral wasn't just random gear placement. The way the lantern was in the center, the water bottle next to it, and my boots further out, it almost looked like some kind of pattern, like a map or a symbol. But I couldn't figure out what it meant. I thought about calling someone, but there was no signal. I tried driving back to get cell service, but as soon as I stepped away from the tent, I got this weird feeling of being watched, like there was something just beyond the tree line, too far to see but too close to ignore. I got in my car, locked the doors, and looked back at the tent and spiral one last time. Everything seemed normal again. The tent zipped up, gear back where it was supposed to be. I don't know if I imagined that part or if it actually changed back, but I didn't wait to find out. I drove home. I keep thinking about that night, about how no one else was around, no sounds, no tracks, and how every zipper was open halfway with my stuff arranged like that. I never found any explanation, and I'm not sure I want one. I was walking my dog just after sunset, the kind of early spring evening where the air still holds a bit of chill, but the sky's clearing from a day of clouds. I live in a pretty quiet neighborhood, mostly single-family homes, some streetlights, and a park nearby. Nothing fancy. It was the end of a long day, and I wanted to clear my head before dinner. I was on the sidewalk near my house, leash in hand, watching my dog sniff around the bushes when I noticed something odd in the sky. At first, I thought it might be birds settling in for the night, or maybe a cluster of bats, but it wasn't that either. About 50 feet above the treetops, there was a tight group of small shapes hovering. They looked like drones, those quadcopters people sometimes fly around parks, but this was way too many of them to be hobby drones. They didn't move, not even a little, just hung there like a frozen cloud made of tiny blinking lights. The lights were pale white, steady, no flashing, no blinking patterns like you'd expect from drones trying to stay visible. The weirdest part was that there was absolutely no sound. I mean, if you've ever been near a drone, you know the high-pitched whine they make, even from a distance. But these were silent, dead quiet. I stopped and looked up, trying to make sense of it. My dog tugged the leash, pulling me forward, but I kept my eyes on those things. They didn't drift or change shape, just stayed clustered together, unmoving. It was almost like they were waiting. A couple of neighbors were outside too, walking their dogs or just standing around. I heard someone say, "What the hell is that?" And another person asked if they were part of some new light show or art installation. But no one seemed to know. Nobody moved toward the streetlights or cars to get a better look. We all just stared. After maybe 5 minutes, the cluster started to fade. Not like slowly moving away or flying off, just disappeared. Like someone flipped a switch. 1 second the lights were there, the next, nothing. The sky was empty again. That was the first weird thing. But then more small oddities happened that night. Later, when I got inside, I tried to tell my husband about the drones, but he thought I was messing with him. I wasn't, but I didn't have any proof, obviously. The TV remote stopped working for a few minutes out of nowhere. Then my phone flickered and went dead for a moment, though it was fully charged. My laptop lost Wi-Fi signal and the lights in the kitchen dimmed briefly. I figured maybe it was just a coincidence or a power surge. But then I remembered the neighbors. The next day, I talked to a few of them. Almost everyone who'd been outside saw the same thing. The silent cluster, the sudden disappearance. And several mentioned their pets acting weird that evening. One neighbor said his dog had been barking non-stop, staring up at the sky like it saw something invisible. Another said her cat was hiding all night, refusing to come out. No one could explain it, and there was no news about drones or anything unusual in the area. That night, as I was lying in bed, I thought I heard a faint pulsing tone. It was low and rhythmic, almost electronic, but not loud enough to be obvious. It came and went. I couldn't place where it was coming from, outside maybe, or just inside my head. I tried to ignore it and fell asleep. The next day I checked online for any reports or sightings, but nothing matched what I saw. No news, no police reports, no social media buzz, just silence. A few days later, I looked up at the sky again, hoping maybe to see those drones or figure out what they were. Nothing. The neighborhood felt normal, but something about that night stuck with me. The quiet cluster, the way they vanished all at once, the way everything glitchy happened right after. It was like the world had paused for a moment, and I caught a glimpse of something just outside my understanding. I don't know what those things were, or why they were there, but I keep wondering if anyone else saw them. Sometimes when I'm outside at dusk, I look up and half expect to see that still, silent cluster again, but the sky is always empty. I was out on the lake late one night, just me and my little fishing boat. I usually don't go that late, but the week had been rough, and I figured maybe I'd catch something if I stayed out past midnight. The water was dead calm, no breeze at all. the kind of night where you feel like the whole world is holding its breath. I was about halfway across the lake, near where the trees start thickening up on the far shore. I just reeled in a small base and was fixing to toss the line back when I noticed something odd in the water. At first, it was just a dark shadow way down below the surface, too big to be a fish or anything I've ever seen. It was moving slow, like it was gliding. The weirdest part was the water around it didn't ripple or even make a sound. Usually even a big fish breaks the surface or stirs the water some, but this thing left the water perfectly still. I leaned over the side of the boat, trying to get a better look. The shape was huge and dark, kind of oval but uneven at the edges. It moved under the surface in a way that didn't seem natural, almost like it was hovering underwater. The moonlight was bright enough that I could make out the outline, but there were no reflections or flashes off scales or anything. I wasn't scared at first, just confused. I thought maybe it was some kind of debris or a shadow from the trees, but the shape moved independently, crossing beneath my boat. I turned on the small flashlight I keep on the boat, trying to catch a better view, but the beam didn't even reach down far enough to touch it. It was like the darkness under the water was absorbing the light. After a minute or two, I thought about throwing the line over near the shape to see if it'd bite or stir anything up, but the idea felt wrong, like I was about to mess with something I wasn't supposed to. So I didn't. The silence around me was total, except for the gentle lapping of the boat on the water. But the lake itself didn't move. No ripples, no waves, nothing. That stillness stuck out like it was holding back, waiting. Then without warning, the shape moved faster, gliding just under the surface toward the shore. Still no ripples. I grabbed the oars, started paddling slowly in the opposite direction, trying not to make a fuss. The last thing I wanted was to be stranded out there with whatever that was. As I paddled, I caught this low humming sound, barely there. It wasn't like any engine or motor I'd ever heard, more like a deep vibration that seemed to come from inside the water itself. I stopped paddling, held my breath, and listened. The sound faded quickly, but it was enough to make my skin crawl. Once I got closer to shore, the water finally started moving again. Small waves, frogs croaking, the usual nighttime stuff. I pulled the boat in, got out, and walked up to the dock. I glanced back at the lake, but the water was just normal now. No shadows, no humming. The next morning, I asked around the marina if anyone else had noticed anything strange on the lake the night before. Most people just laughed it off, said I probably saw a big log or a shadow. But a few of the old-timers said they'd seen odd things over the years. Lights under the water, weird sounds, strange still patches, nothing that ever got explained. I kept thinking about that shape moving silently under the water, how the lake just stayed perfectly still even though something huge was passing beneath it, and that humming sound, like the lake was alive in a way I didn't understand. I haven't gone out late on the lake since. Just the thought of being out there in that quiet with something like that beneath me is enough to keep me on shore. I work the overnight shift at a gas station on the edge of town. It's the kind of place that mostly sees the same few late-night travelers or local workers grabbing a quick snack or gas. Usually nights drag, but every once in a while, something happens that messes with your head for a while. One night, around 2:30 a.m., I was restocking the cooler by the back of the store when I glanced out the big front window. The sky was clear, and I caught something strange moving just above the horizon. It looked like a bright streak of light, maybe a shooting star or a plane, but it didn't behave like either. The light streaked across the sky quickly, then suddenly stopped midair. It just hung there, paused like someone had hit pause on a video. Then, just as suddenly, it darted backward the way it came, only faster, disappearing behind the trees. I blinked and rubbed my eyes. The whole thing only lasted about 5 seconds. There was no sound, no hum, no crackle, nothing. I was sure I would have heard a plane or something moving that fast overhead, but the gas station was dead silent except for the old refrigerator humming. Curious, I went over to the security cameras mounted outside, which cover the parking lot and a bit of the sky. The footage showed the same thing, a blurry white streak crossing the sky, freezing in place, then zooming back the other way. The object was just a bright, fuzzy shape. No wings or tail, no blinking lights like an airplane, nothing that looked familiar. I showed the clip to my coworker when she came in for the next shift, but she just shrugged. She said she never heard or saw anything while she was on. Nobody else mentioned anything weird that night. The next day, I asked a few regulars if they'd noticed anything strange, but no one had. The local news was quiet, no reports of meteor showers or planes. It was like the whole thing had happened only in my head, except the security footage was real. I kept thinking about the silence. Normally, with something moving that fast in the sky, especially close enough to see clearly, you'd hear at least a faint noise. But that night, there was nothing. Not even a gust of wind or a rustling tree. Over the next few days, I rewatched the footage a bunch of times. Each time I looked, I noticed little things I hadn't before, like the way the object's edges shimmered, almost like heat waves, but it was cold outside. Or how the light seemed to flicker, like it wasn't steady but pulsing softly. One night after my shift, I went outside and looked up, hoping to catch whatever it was again. The sky was empty except for stars, and it felt normal, quiet. But I kept thinking about that frozen streak in the sky and how it vanished without a trace. I haven't seen anything like it since. Sometimes I wonder if anyone else ever caught a glimpse or if I was just the only one awake to notice. The footage stays saved on my phone, but it doesn't explain anything. Just a blurry light, moving weird, silent, and gone. I was checking out this old warehouse on the edge of town. Nothing special about the building itself, just one of those places nobody bothered with for years, boarded up and falling apart. I'm not really into urban exploration or anything, but a friend had mentioned it, said there was some weird stuff inside. So I figured I'd take a look. Just me, my flashlight, and a cheap camera. The day was overcast, the kind of gray sky that makes everything look kind of dull and lifeless. I parked a few blocks away and walked over, keeping an eye out for anyone else or security cameras. The front door was locked tight, but there was a broken window on the side I could squeeze through. The glass was jagged and dirty, but I made it inside without much trouble. The place smelled like old dust and something burnt. It was quiet, except for the occasional drip of water somewhere. I moved slow, shining my flashlight around, stepping carefully over broken wood and rusty metal scraps on the floor. The walls were covered with graffiti and peeling paint, and in some spots, the ceiling tiles were missing or hanging loose. After wandering for about 20 minutes, I found a door that looked different, newer hardware, like someone had used it more recently than the rest of the place. It was cracked open just enough to slip through. Inside was a room I wasn't expecting. The ceiling was covered in blackened, scorched tiles, some melted into twisted shapes. Pieces of metal, like parts of light fixtures or ductwork, were bent and warped, looking like they'd been exposed to intense heat. The smell of burnt plastic hung heavy in the air, sharp and unnatural. But when I looked around the rest of the room, the walls and floor didn't have any soot or smoke stains. No scorch marks on the walls, no burnt debris on the ground. It was like the fire only happened up above, in the ceiling, and nowhere else. I kept shining my light, trying to see if there was anything else. The metal debris was odd. Some bits looked like parts of electrical equipment, but I couldn't make out what exactly. There were no wires or cables, just these mangled, melted pieces that seemed to have been twisted into nothing. That's when I noticed something else. The air inside the room was warmer, noticeably warmer than the rest of the building. I pulled out my phone and checked the temperature app. Outside the building, it was around 54 degrees Fahrenheit, but in that room, it was about 70. I didn't feel a draft or anything else explaining the heat. It was just warm. I started to feel uneasy. The silence was heavier here, like the rest of the warehouse noise had been sucked out. I looked back up at the ceiling again. The tiles were warped, bubbling in some places, but none of them had fallen. No ceiling panels were missing, just damaged. Then I noticed faint marks on the floor near the corner. I bent down and saw these weird scorch-like impressions, dark, circular patterns embedded in the concrete. They looked like they'd been made by something hot sitting there, but there was no ash or residue around them. Just these perfect, clean circles, almost like someone pressed hot plates onto the floor. I started taking pictures, but the flash didn't work right in that room. Every photo came out blurry or overexposed, like the camera couldn't focus on anything properly. When I checked the pictures afterward, some had these strange light streaks in places where my flashlight hadn't shined. I decided to get out of there. The warm air felt like it was pressing against me now, making it hard to breathe right. On my way back to the hallway, I heard a low humming sound, very faint, almost like electricity buzzing, but more like a vibration under the skin. It wasn't constant, it came and went. I paused and waited, but nothing else happened. No footsteps, no voices, just that subtle vibration. When I got back outside and looked around the building from the street, it looked like a normal abandoned warehouse. No smoke, no scorch marks on the outside. The air was cold again, the temperature back to normal. I drove home thinking about that room, how it looked like something intense happened there, but with no signs anywhere else, like it was contained or erased somehow. I still don't know what caused those scorch marks or why the room was warm or what that humming was, and I keep wondering if someone else has been in there recently, maybe messing with the place in ways I can't understand. That's the last time I went back. I don't know what I stumbled onto, but I don't want to find out anymore. I was out for my usual early morning jog, the kind where the sun's not quite up yet, but the sky's starting to lighten a bit. It was late summer, and the air had that damp, cool feel you get just before dawn. I like running before the world wakes up. Quiet, nothing around except the road, some trees, and the occasional field. That morning, I was on a stretch where the road runs along this big cornfield. I'd passed it dozens of times, but something about that day felt different. I was maybe a quarter mile in when I noticed it. A silver sphere, just hovering a few feet above the corn stalks. Not moving, not making a sound. It wasn't high up like a balloon or drone, but low enough that if I'd walked into the field, I could have touched it. At first, I thought it might be some kind of weather balloon or an experimental drone, but it wasn't moving at all. Just hanging there, perfectly still. The surface was smooth, reflective like chrome, but dull, not shiny or polished. I stopped running and stared for a few seconds, trying to figure out if I was imagining it or if it was some weird trick of the light. There were no blinking lights or anything mechanical about it. No wires, no support holding it up. The corn around it didn't move either. No wind or breeze. The whole thing felt off, like something out of place. I thought about pulling my phone out to take a picture, but the screen was dead. Battery was fine the night before, but it wouldn't turn on. Figured maybe the cold had something to do with it, so I shoved it back in my pocket and kept looking. The sky was brightening slowly, and as the sun crept closer to the horizon, the sphere started to fade. Not by moving away or anything, but just becoming less solid, like it was flickering out of existence. I blinked a couple of times, but when I looked back, it was gone. I wasn't sure how long I stood there. The silence was heavy, but there was no sound coming from the sphere, no humming or buzzing like you'd expect from a drone or machine. Just the regular early morning quiet, maybe the distant call of a bird or something. I started running again, trying to shake the weird feeling, but it stuck with me. When I got home, I told my wife what I'd seen, but she just gave me that look like I was making it up, or maybe I'd been half asleep. I didn't blame her. It sounded crazy. I checked my phone. Battery was fine again, no idea why it died just then. I tried to find news or anything online about some weird event, but nothing. I kept thinking about it all day. The strange quiet, the way it just hung there and then disappeared. I went back to that spot in the afternoon to see if I could find anything left behind. The field looked normal at first, tall, green corn standing straight, but then I noticed a patch near the edge, right where the sphere had been. The corn was completely flattened, like someone had pressed down on it hard, but it wasn't random. It was a perfect rectangle, sharp edges, straight lines, looked almost like someone had taken a giant stamp and pressed it down. The stalks weren't broken or snapped. They were just lying flat, all pointing the same way, like they'd been carefully pushed over. I walked around it, feeling the ground. It was dry, no footprints or tire tracks. The soil wasn't disturbed beyond the flattened corn. No signs of fire, no scorch marks or anything else unusual, just that strange patch in the middle of the field. I took a few photos with my phone. No weird light streaks or glitches this time. just the rectangle of flattened corn. I told a neighbor about it, an older guy who's lived around there forever. He said he hadn't noticed anything the night before or that morning. No planes or helicopters, no noise or flashing lights. He didn't believe in that stuff, but admitted it was odd. That night, I kept thinking about the sphere and the field. I felt like I was being watched for a while, but when I looked outside, nothing was there. No cars, no shadows moving near the house. The next few days, I checked the field every morning. The flattened patch stayed the same. No new damage, no signs anyone had been near it. The rest of the corn grew like normal, untouched. I don't know what I saw that morning or what made the field look like that. It's still out there, the rectangle of flat corn, just a few feet from the road. People drive by it, but no one talks about it much. Sometimes I wonder if I should go back, see if the sphere ever comes back, but I don't know if I want to. I was driving back from a friend's place late one Saturday night, taking the old backwoods road that cuts through those hills outside town. It's a narrow, two-lane thing, nothing fancy, and most people avoid it after dark because it's easy to get spooked. I didn't have any better route though, and I figured I'd be fine. The whole trip is maybe 15 minutes tops. The road was wet from an earlier rain, and the headlights made the trees on either side look sharper, darker. It was quiet, except for the sound of the tires on the slick pavement and the occasional splash when I drove through puddles. I was thinking about nothing in particular, just tired and ready to get home. Then, out of nowhere, I saw someone standing right in the middle of the road. My headlights hit them full on. The figure was a person, looked like a man, maybe in his 30s or 40s, wearing dark clothes that didn't really reflect the light but showed the shape of a jacket and pants. He wasn't moving, just standing there like he was waiting for me to stop. I slammed the brakes, and the car skidded a little on the wet road. The man didn't flinch or move an inch. I kept my eyes on him, heart racing a bit. The road around him was totally empty, no cars behind me or anywhere else in sight. I blinked, just a quick, normal blink, and when I opened my eyes again, he was gone. Just like that. No figure, no shadow, nothing. The whole road was empty. I was confused. I turned on the high beams and looked down the road both ways. Nothing. No headlights, no movement. I thought maybe I just imagined it for a second, but my hands were still tight on the wheel. Then I noticed something on the side of the road where the trees meet a big, sheer rock face that rises almost straight up out of the ground. There was a faint trail of footprints in the damp dirt, starting right from the spot where the man had been standing and heading straight up the rock wall. At first, I thought maybe someone had climbed up and the footprints just looked weird because of the angle or light. But the rock face was basically vertical. No way to walk up something that steep without gear. Yet the prints were clear, like someone had stepped carefully in the wet earth at the base and then just walked up the cliff. I sat there, staring. My breath was shallow. I didn't hear anything. No movement, no sounds of footsteps, no rustling in the trees. The only noise was the rain dripping slowly from leaves. I grabbed my phone to call someone, anyone, but the signal was gone. No bars. No bars. I looked again at the footprints and then back down the road, trying to make sense of it all. After a minute, I decided to drive on. I eased the car forward slowly, keeping the lights trained on the spot where the man had been. Nothing. The footprints disappeared into the rock face about 5 feet up, like the earth just stopped, and then there was nothing. I kept driving, eyes flicking between the road and the cliff. When I looked back over my shoulder a couple of times, I thought I saw something, a flicker of movement, or maybe a shadow. But every time I blinked or looked again, there was nothing there. The rest of the drive home felt heavy, like the air was thicker or colder than usual, but I didn't see anyone else or any other signs of something strange. My phone stayed dead until I hit the main road, and even then, the signal was weak. When I got home, I checked my car for anything out of place. No scratches, no mud on the tires that wasn't normal. Nothing. I don't know what I saw. The footprints made no sense, and the man standing there didn't react like a real person. I tried telling a couple of friends, but they just shrugged it off like I was tired or imagining things. I'm not sure what to think. The road's quiet now, but sometimes I get the urge to look over my shoulder, like something's still watching from that cliff. The power went out just like that. 1 minute, everything was normal, then the streetlights blinked off, and I was standing in the dark. I was up on the rooftop of my building, mostly just killing time, watching the quiet neighborhood below. It wasn't a big city or anything, just a bunch of houses lined up along a couple of streets. I had a pretty clear view of the block down the road, and that's when I noticed the blackout starting. It was weird, because the power outage wasn't random. It was moving block by block, almost like someone was flipping switches one after the other. The first block went dark, then the second, then the third, all in a straight line down the street. You could see the blackout creeping forward like a slow shadow, swallowing each set of streetlights and windows as it moved. The houses behind me still had lights on, but every few seconds, one more block went pitch black. I figured maybe some kind of maintenance or a blown transformer, but the way it moved was too precise, too deliberate. It wasn't flickering or buzzing, just perfectly dark where it passed. I pulled out my phone to check if there was any news, but the screen went dark too, like it was dead, even though it was fully charged just minutes before. That's when I saw it. Just ahead of the blackout, floating over the empty street, was something metallic. I don't mean like a car or a drone, but a smooth, shiny shape that didn't look quite right. It was low, maybe 20 or 30 feet off the ground, and it moved silently, gliding forward ahead of the darkness like it was leading it. The shape was long and curved, almost like a wing or a blade, but without any sharp edges. It caught what little light there was from the moon and reflected it back, like a dull mirror. There was no sound, no hum, no buzz, no engine noise, nothing. At first, I thought it might be a drone, but I've seen plenty of drones before, and this was different. It didn't have lights or propellers, didn't flicker or pulse. It moved smoothly and steadily, as if it was floating on air. The way it cut through the sky made everything around it feel off, like something was wrong with the space it occupied. I tried to focus, but after a few seconds, I noticed the blackout had reached the block right behind it. The lights there blinked out one by one, and the street went totally dark. The metallic shape paused for a moment, just hovering there, then glided forward again, keeping a steady distance ahead of the darkness, like it was herding it or controlling it somehow. I couldn't stop watching, even though my stomach was twisting with unease. It felt like the whole street was holding its breath. I kept glancing back toward my building. The power was still on there, but it wouldn't last. The blackout was creeping closer, slower now, but definitely coming. Then the shape tilted, almost like it noticed me up on the roof. It didn't speed up or try to hide, just shifted slightly, reflecting the moonlight in a way that made it hard to look at directly. I felt my skin crawl and stepped back toward the ladder that led down. My phone still wouldn't turn on, and the streetlights on my block flickered once, then stayed lit. The metallic thing moved again, heading forward toward the next block, and the lights there went out as it passed. The blackout was swallowing the town one block at a time. Perfectly linear, perfectly silent, except for the faint creaks and groans of houses settling in the cold night air. I started climbing down the ladder, heart pounding. From the street, everything looked normal, except for the darkness eating away the blocks down the road. No sirens, no people yelling or rushing around, just the quiet crawl of the blackout. I got back inside and looked out the window. The streetlights on my block still worked, but the block across the way was dark. And in the sky, I swear I caught a glimpse of something metallic, moving just ahead of the darkness again. Smooth, silent, and impossibly still. I checked my phone one last time. Dead. Not a single bar. I didn't sleep that night. Kept looking out the window every few minutes, but the shape didn't show itself again. The blackout didn't reach my block. Not that night, at least. By morning, the power was back on everywhere. I still don't know what I saw or why the blackout moved like that, but it's the only time I've ever felt like something was watching us, moving through the town, like it owned the night. I didn't plan to be out that night. It was a spur-of-the-moment thing, grabbing my telescope and heading to the park. I guess I just needed a break from everything, some time to myself under the stars. The weather was clear, and the air felt cool enough to make it comfortable. The park wasn't far from where I lived, just a short walk, so I didn't bother telling anyone where I was going. I figured I'd only be gone a couple of hours. The park wasn't busy at night, um, which was perfect for me. A few streetlights lined the main path, but beyond that, it was mostly dark. There's a hill at the far end of the park that gives you a decent view of the sky, so that's where I set up. I carried my telescope in its case and brought a small backpack with a notebook, a flashlight, and some snacks. The hill was quiet, just me and the crickets chirping. I could hear the faint hum of cars in the distance, but it didn't bother me. I set up my telescope and pointed it toward the eastern sky. It wasn't anything special, just a mid-range model I'd picked up a few years ago, but it worked well enough for stargazing. I started with the usual things: bright stars, constellations, a few planets I could identify. It was relaxing, just sitting there looking up at the vastness of space. After a while, I noticed something odd. There was a cluster of stars near the horizon that didn't look right. They weren't part of any constellation I knew, and their arrangement seemed too perfect, like they'd been placed there on purpose. At first, I thought it might be some kind of optical illusion, or maybe my telescope was out of alignment. I adjusted the lens, checked the focus, but the pattern didn't change. The stars were arranged in a grid-like formation with equal spacing between them. It wasn't natural. I couldn't explain it, but something about it felt off. I sat there for a long time, staring at the pattern, trying to make sense of it. Then I noticed something else. The stars were blinking, not in the way stars normally twinkle. This was different. They were blinking in a sequence, one after the other, like they were following a rhythm. I grabbed my notebook and started writing down the pattern. At first, it didn't make any sense, just a series of dots and dashes like Morse code. But the more I looked at it, the more I felt like it was deliberate, like someone or something was trying to communicate. I didn't know what to do. I didn't have a computer with me, and my phone was back at home. I thought about going back to get it, but I was afraid the pattern might change or disappear if I left. So I stayed there, staring through the telescope, writing down every blink, every sequence. Hours passed, but I couldn't bring myself to stop. Around midnight, the blinking changed. The pattern slowed down, becoming more regular, almost like it was waiting for a response. I don't know why, but I felt like it was watching me, like it knew I was there. The thought sent a chill down my spine. I shined my flashlight around, half expecting to see someone standing behind me, but there was nothing. Just the empty park and the sound of the wind in the trees. I turned back to the telescope and adjusted the focus again. That's when I saw it. It wasn't just stars. There was something else, something faint but unmistakable, just beyond the grid. It looked like a shape, dark and massive, blocking out part of the sky. It wasn't a cloud or a shadow. It was solid, and it was moving, slowly but deliberately. My hands were shaking as I tried to keep the telescope steady. The object was huge, bigger than anything I had ever seen. It looked like a ship, but not like any ship I could imagine. Its surface was smooth, almost reflective, and it had no visible lights or markings. It just hovered there, silent and ominous, on the edge of the atmosphere. The blinking stars, if they were stars, seemed to be coming from the ship. They weren't part of the sky at all. They were part of it. I felt a wave of panic rising in my chest. This wasn't normal. This wasn't right. I thought about packing up and running home, but my legs felt like they were glued to the ground. Then the blinking started again, faster this time. The grid shifted, and the lights formed a new pattern. It took me a moment to realize what it was. They were letters, English letters. I could hardly believe it, but there it was, spelled out in the sky. Help. I froze. My mind was racing. Help? Help with what? Who or what needed help? I didn't know what to do. My first instinct was to yell, to scream into the night, but I knew that wouldn't accomplish anything. Instead, I grabbed my notebook and started writing down the letters as they appeared. The message kept coming, one word at a time. Danger. Trapped. Escape. I couldn't make sense of it, but the urgency was clear. Whatever was out there, it was in trouble, and it was reaching out to me. I felt a strange mix of fear and responsibility, like I'd been chosen for something I didn't understand. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the blinking stopped. The grid of lights faded, and the massive ship began to move. It didn't accelerate or make any noise. It just drifted away, disappearing into the darkness like a shadow melting into the night. I stared after it, my heart pounding, until the sky was empty again. I sat there for a long time, trying to process what I'd seen. The message, the ship, the lights. It all felt like a dream, but the notes in my hand were proof it wasn't. I packed up my telescope and walked home in a daze, replaying the events over and over in my mind. I still don't know what it meant or why it chose me. I've gone back to the park a few times since then, hoping to see the lights again, but the sky has been normal. Just stars and constellations, nothing unusual. I've thought about telling someone, scientists, authorities, anyone, but I don't know how to explain it without sounding crazy. All I have are my notes and the memory of that night. I can't shake the feeling that it wasn't just a random encounter. It felt deliberate, like a warning or a plea for help. Whatever it was, it's out there, somewhere, and I can't stop wondering if it will come back. We'd been out since just before dawn. It was late October, cool and damp, frost still clinging to the grass when we parked the truck. Me and Wes had hunted this patch of forest for years just north of the state line, about 40 minutes from his place. We had tags, we had permits, we were doing it by the book. We'd split off early, met back around noon to eat, then headed deeper into the woods. It was quieter out there, fewer trails, thicker trees. Not many people bothered going that far back unless they were serious about it. Around 2:30, we spotted movement across a gully. Something big. Didn't look like a buck. Too low to the ground. Moved different. We couldn't tell for sure, but we figured maybe a black bear. Could have been a hog, but it didn't have the right build. We didn't speak, just looked at each other, nodded, and started tracking it. We crossed the gully and found a trail, heavy prints in the mud, but no real shape to them. Just deep dents like something heavy had passed through. The brush was pushed down in a straight line, not wandering like deer usually do. It wasn't running either, just moving steady like it knew where it was going. We followed it for a while, maybe 15 minutes. We were moving slow, careful not to make noise. I remember noticing how unusually still everything was. No wind, no birds, no squirrels. At first, I figured maybe the animal had scared them off, but it felt like more than that. Like the whole forest had shut off. I whispered something to Wes about it, but he didn't say anything. He just looked around like he'd noticed it too. The trail led us to a denser part of the woods. Big pines, tight together. The ground softened under our boots with old needles and damp soil. That's when it started getting strange. The sound just stopped. I don't mean it got quiet. I mean it stopped. We both paused at the same time. I turned to say something to Wes and realized I couldn't hear my own footsteps. I tapped the butt of my rifle against the tree next to me, and it didn't make a sound. I could feel it in my hand, the vibration of the impact, but there was no noise. Not muffled, not faint, just nothing. I looked at Wes and he had this weird, frozen expression. He moved his mouth, but I didn't hear anything come out. I tried saying his name. Nothing. There was no ringing in my ears, no pressure like when your ears pop. It was like being underwater, but without the distortion. Just complete silence. We stood there like that for maybe a minute, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. Then we noticed the light had changed. It wasn't darker, exactly, but the shadows looked wrong, softer. The sunlight filtering through the trees had this weird tint to it, kind of silvery. Hard to describe, Zach, but it didn't look natural. That's when we saw the thing above the trees. It was huge, took up the whole sky above us, but not like a cloud or a storm. It was a solid shape, smooth and dark, almost black, but with this faint shimmer around the edges like heat rising off asphalt. No sound, no wind, just hanging there above the canopy. I couldn't make out details, not really. No markings or lights, just a big matte shape, maybe oval or diamond shaped. The trees blocked most of it, but you could see the way the tops bent slightly like they were being pulled upward. Not breaking, just leaning. I remember looking at Wes and seeing his hands shaking. I hadn't noticed mine were too. Neither of us moved. I don't think we could have if we wanted to. My legs felt like they were full of sand. Then, slowly, the silence started to lift. It wasn't all at once. First, I heard a dry snap of a branch behind me, then the faint rustling of leaves. Then, like someone turning up a volume knob, all the little forest sounds started to return. Birds chirping, wind in the trees, distant insects. I turned back toward the sky and the object was gone. No movement, no sound, just gone. We stood there another couple minutes, trying to process it. Wes finally said something. Just a quiet, "What the fuck was that?" And I felt this weird jolt, like I'd forgotten what his voice sounded like. We didn't talk much after that. We headed straight back toward the truck, didn't even bother checking the trail. It felt like we'd walked into something we weren't supposed to see. When we got back, it was 4:45. The walk should have taken maybe 30 minutes. We'd lost over an hour somewhere, and neither of us remembered stopping that long. We didn't say anything to anyone, didn't make a report. I didn't even bring it up again for almost a year. Then, one night, we were drinking on Wes's porch, and he asked me out of nowhere, "You ever think about that thing in the woods?" I said, "Yeah, pretty often." It was during winter break, sometime in late December. I was 16 and living at my parents' place out in a small town in central Oregon. Not totally middle of nowhere, but quiet. Not much light pollution. We had a decent-sized backyard, a couple pine trees at the edge of the property line, and beyond that, just empty fields for a few miles before the next subdivision. I'd gotten into stargazing around then. Nothing serious, just a cheap telescope from a garage sale and a free app on my phone that told you what you were looking at. Most nights, I just lay on a blanket with a hoodie and watched planes go by, or tried to find Jupiter. This happened around 11 at night. It was cold but clear. Crisp air, no clouds. I remember because it was one of those nights where you can see your breath hang in the air for a second, even when you're not exhaling hard. I'd brought out a thermos of tea and some headphones, but I hadn't started listening to anything yet, just watching. I was looking up near Orion, trying to find the Horsehead Nebula, when I noticed 3 stars off to the side, way higher and more east than where I was focusing. They weren't part of any constellation I recognized, and they were bright, not moving, not blinking like planes, just steady white lights. 2 were sort of close together, and the third one was a little farther off, like a stretched triangle. I wouldn't have thought anything of it, except they started to move. Not fast, slow enough that I wasn't even sure they were moving at first. But after maybe 10 seconds, I realized they were inching toward each other. The 2 closer ones drifted just a little, then the third adjusted to match. It all happened really gradually, like watching a clock hand move. But after about a minute, they'd formed a perfect equilateral triangle, and then they just stopped. Not wobbling, not drifting, locked in. I remember thinking how exact it looked, like someone drew it with a ruler. And it stayed like that for maybe 30 seconds. No noise, no trails, just completely still. Then, just as slowly, they drifted out of it, but not back into their original spots. They just sort of unraveled. Like the triangle shape never mattered. One peeled off to the left. Another dropped slightly. They all kept moving, but not in sync anymore. After a minute or two, they'd completely lost the pattern. I sat up on my elbows and kept watching. I didn't know what to do. I remember looking at my phone to make sure it hadn't frozen or glitched. The time kept moving normally. After maybe 5 minutes of slow drifting, the 3 lights just dimmed, like someone slowly turned down a dimmer switch. One blinked out entirely. The others faded until I couldn't tell if they were gone or just blending in with the regular stars again. I sat there for a while longer, kind of frozen, just staring up. Eventually, I stood and scanned the sky to see if anything else looked off. Nothing did. Everything else looked exactly how it should. Orion was in the same place. I found Polaris. Even checked the app again. No satellites were listed in that part of the sky, and no scheduled ISS pass. I was about to pack up and go inside when I realized something weird about the backyard. It was quiet. Not the kind of quiet you get at night, but completely quiet. No wind, no distant cars, no barking dogs, no sound at all. That made me stop for a second. Usually, even at night, you hear something. An owl, a plane, distant highway noise. But it was like someone had stuffed cotton in my ears. It wasn't for long, maybe 10 seconds. Then a gust of wind kicked up and the sound came back all at once. Just back to normal. That part somehow bothered me more than the lights. I went inside and didn't sleep great. My chest felt tight for most of the night, like I'd just gotten startled but never came down from it. The next night, I tried to find the same three lights, but the sky looked normal. I stargazed a few more times that week, but never saw anything like it again. I never told my parents. I think I mentioned it to a friend a few months later, kind of like a joke, but I downplayed it. I've never seen anything like that since. The dog started barking around 3:17 a.m. every single night. Not just once or twice, but like clockwork for a week straight. It was weird because we live out in the country, and usually the dogs don't make a fuss unless there's a raccoon or something rustling through the bushes. But this barking wasn't normal. It was sharp, urgent, almost like the dog was warning us. I'm not the most observant when I'm half asleep, but my son kept waking up, telling us the dog was going crazy outside. We have two dogs, but it was always the younger one, Max, doing this. His bark wasn't like a threat, more like confusion or fear. It started to creep me out after a few nights because I'd check the clock every time I heard it, and sure enough, it was always 3:17, give or take a minute or two. On the third night, I got out of bed to see what was going on. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and opened the back door slowly. The yard was dark, the moon just a sliver, barely lighting up anything. Max was standing at the edge of the porch, his hackles up, eyes fixed on the far corner of the yard. Nothing was moving, but he wouldn't stop barking. I stepped out, calling his name softly, trying to get him to calm down. Then I noticed something odd. The air felt different. Not cold, but heavy, like the quiet before a storm. The usual sounds of the night, crickets, the rustle of leaves, distant frogs, all seemed to drop away. It was dead silent, except for Max's barking. I didn't see anything, but the feeling wouldn't go away, so I went back inside and locked the door behind me. I told my wife about it the next day, but she brushed it off, said dogs sometimes get spooked by things we don't notice. Fair enough. The next night, same thing. Max barking at exactly 3:17. This time, my wife and I decided to check the security cameras we'd installed a few months ago after a string of break-ins in the neighborhood. We figured maybe there was someone lurking around or a wild animal close by. We rewound the footage to the time of the barking. The video showed the yard clearly, the porch light casting long shadows over the grass. But then something really strange happened. Right when Max started barking, the screen flickered with static for a split second. Nothing unusual there, cameras sometimes glitch, but when the image cleared, Max was gone. No dog in the yard at all, just empty grass and shadows. I rewound it and played it over and over. Max had been inside earlier, and the timestamp was right. We heard him barking, but the camera showed no sign of him stepping outside. The footage right before and right after that glitch showed the yard empty. The glitch lasted less than 2 seconds, but it was enough to erase Max from the video completely. I checked the other cameras around the house, but none of them caught anything unusual. Just a weird static glitch on the one facing the backyard. I showed it to a friend who's into tech, but he said it could be a minor camera malfunction, nothing to worry about. But it wasn't just the glitch. Over the next few nights, the barking got different. Sometimes Max would stop suddenly, like he saw something just at the edge of the yard, and then it disappeared. Other times, he'd stare straight into the darkness without moving his head, just locked on one spot, his body tense, tail stiff. One night, I stayed awake, watching the security feed live on my phone. At exactly 3:17, Max started barking again. I looked out the window at the yard. Still dark, still empty. The camera feed went blurry, static blooming across the screen for a few seconds. When it cleared, Max was gone. But I was watching the porch with my own eyes, and he was standing there, fur bristled, looking out. I felt my stomach twist. How could the camera not see him when I was right there? I blinked, thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks. Then I noticed something else, a faint, pale glow near the far corner of the yard, barely visible through the bushes. It was dim, like the light of a cell phone screen, but without any shape or source. The light pulsed slowly, almost like it was breathing. Max barked at the glow, but then the light vanished. Max stopped barking immediately, his whole body relaxing as if whatever was there was gone. I kept staring into the dark, but it was empty again. I went outside after a few minutes to check. Nothing. No light, no footprints, no broken branches. After that night, Max's barking stopped completely. It was like nothing had ever happened. He acted normal, happy, back to chasing squirrels during the day. I kept checking the cameras, hoping to see that glitch again, or the light, but the footage was normal. No static, no missing dog, just ordinary nights. I still don't know what was there in the yard, something I couldn't see or catch on camera. Something that made my dog bark like he did, but vanished when we tried to prove it was real. That's the part that gets me. How can something be so present and then disappear like it was never there? I used to spend a lot of late nights in my garage messing with radios. I've been into shortwave since high school, just something about scanning around and catching weird stations from halfway across the world. I'm not licensed or anything serious like that, just one of those guys with a shelf full of gear and a beep-up antenna strapped to the roof. This happened last November, around 2 in the morning. My wife was already asleep upstairs, and I'd come out to the garage to tinker around, mostly just flipping through bands out of boredom. It was one of those dry, windless nights where everything feels kind of muted. No wind, no bugs, just that soft hum from the street lamp outside and the occasional creak from the water heater. I had my Grundig set up with the loop antenna plugged in, just slowly sweeping the bands like I always did. A lot of static, occasional snippets of weird foreign broadcasts, the usual. I wasn't expecting to pick up anything interesting. Most of the traffic that time of night is just garbage. Then I landed on something around 9.4 megahertz that wasn't quite right. It started as this low, steady pulse, like a metronome, but duller. It didn't sound natural. No voice, no modulation, just this dry, electronic tick, about one every second. I listened for a bit, figured maybe it was just one of those utility stations or a test tone from a military frequency. But then it changed. The tick doubled in speed, then tripled, then dropped back down. I didn't touch anything. The frequency stayed locked, but it started forming a pattern. 3 fast ticks, pause, 1 long tick, pause, then 5 short ones in a row. Then it repeated. I grabbed a notebook and started jotting it down. I do that sometimes when I catch odd transmissions, just for fun, really. But this one kept going exactly the same, over and over. 3 short, 1 long, 5 short. Then pause. Then again, like clockwork. I listened to that loop maybe 20 times, thinking it might be Morse, but it didn't line up. I mean, maybe loosely, but it didn't translate into anything. It wasn't a message, at least not in any format I recognized, but it felt deliberate, if that makes sense, like someone or something was trying to draw attention without actually saying anything. After about 10 minutes of that, I decided to record it. I had my little digital recorder I usually use for samples. I hooked it up, hit record, and switched back to the frequency. Silence. Not static. Just nothing. Like the signal had been yanked. I thought maybe I bumped the antenna or a cable came loose, but everything looked fine. I tuned a little up and down the band, thinking maybe it shifted, but it was just dead air. The whole section of the spectrum felt empty. Not even the usual fuzz. I unplugged the recorder, switched everything back to how it was before, and suddenly the static came back. Not the signal, that was gone, but the general background noise. I sat there for maybe 20 minutes, scanning up and down to find it again. Nothing. I left the radio on while I got up to stretch. The garage felt weird, colder than it had a minute ago. Not freezing, but off. Like how a room feels after someone's just walked through it. I opened the side door and stepped out onto the driveway to get some air. Everything was quiet. I live at the edge of a neighborhood cul-de-sac. Not out in the sticks, but not dense suburban either. We've got a few motion sensor lights, and they were all dark. No wind, no cars, just dead still. When I turned to go back in, I noticed the porch light flicker once, then stay off. Figured it was a loose bulb. I walked in, flipped the switch off, and back on. Nothing. The breaker was fine. All the other lights in the garage were still working. I went back to the desk, powered the radio off, then on again. Ran through the usual bands. It was like someone had wiped the whole slice of air clean. I don't know how else to say it. You get used to a certain level of clutter on shortwave, interference, buzz, drift. But this was silent, like someone turned off the world behind the static. About an hour later, I gave up and went inside. Checked the clock on the oven. 3:13. My watch said 3:24. I remember squinting at it, trying to remember if I'd said it wrong or if the power had gone out, but everything else in the kitchen was on time. I woke up later that morning feeling wired and kind of off, like I hadn't really slept, even though I'd been out for hours. The first thing I did was check the recorder. There was a file on it. 12 seconds of me plugging in the cable. Then silence. Not even hiss. That whole day, I kept thinking about that pattern. 3 fast, 1 long, 5 fast. I caught myself writing it down again at work, like it was stuck in my head. I ran it through some online Morse decoders, tried treating it like binary, looked up numbers stations archives. Nothing matched. It didn't exist, at least not anywhere I could find. The next night, I went back out, tried to replicate the setup exactly. Same frequency, same antenna, same gear. Nothing. I even left the recorder running for an hour just in case. Picked up a couple weird bleeps from South America and what might have been Russian naval traffic, but not that pulse. I tried for a week straight, same time, same band. It never came back. But here's the part that really stuck with me. A few nights later, around the same time, 2:15 or so, I was out back letting the dog out. It was cold and clear. I looked up, just kind of zoning out, and I saw what looked like a satellite, one of those steady, slow-moving dots crossing the sky. Except this one stopped, right above the house, dead stop. No wobble, no drift, just hung there for maybe 10 seconds. Then it blinked once and faded out. I didn't tell my wife about any of it, just said I was having issues with the radio and left it at that. I packed up most of my gear the next day. Still have it, just haven't touched it since. Not sure why. Nothing really happened, but it's like something opened for a second then shut again. And I was just close enough to know I wasn't supposed to be there. I parked off a dirt road just before dusk, about an hour outside of Moab. Nothing official, just a little clearing behind some scrub, flat enough to pitch a tent. I'd been doing these solo desert trips for a while. No cell reception, no real plan. Just a weekend to clear my head. The day had been normal. Hot, dry, a little wind. I set up my tent around 6, cooked some instant rice and beans on the little camp stove, drank a beer, and watched the sunset. I remember thinking how quiet it was. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, more like a weird, empty silence. No birds, no bugs, nothing moving. But I chalked it up to being out in the middle of nowhere. After dark, I built a small fire. Nothing big. I didn't want to draw attention. Just enough to sit by for a while. I wasn't tired yet, so I stayed out there with my boots off, poking at the fire with a stick and listening to the wind come and go. At one point, I thought I heard something walking behind me, maybe 20 or 30 feet out. But when I stood up and shined my flashlight around, there was nothing. Just creosote bushes and rocks. I told myself it was probably a jackrabbit or something. It was close to midnight when I finally zipped into my tent. I'd left the rain fly off because it was warm and I wanted to see the stars. I lay there for a while, watching the sky through the mesh. The stars were insane, bright enough that I could see the faint outlines of the rocks around me. That's when I saw the lights. They were just there, perfect circle, not moving, not flickering, about 20 feet above the ground, maybe 30 feet wide, just hovering directly above my campsite, completely silent. I didn't hear them arrive. I didn't feel anything. 1 second it was just stars, and the next there was this ring of lights, not blinding, but definitely bright. Like little white spheres spaced evenly apart, forming a perfect circle. I didn't get up, I didn't move at all, I just stared at them through the mesh. My brain kind of locked up. I kept thinking they had to be drones or reflection and explainable. But they didn't move. They didn't make a sound. And I couldn't think of anything that would look like that. That precise, just hanging there without a sound. After a few minutes, I don't know how many, the lights started rotating. Still keeping the same circle shape, just slowly spinning clockwise. Not fast, not wobbly, just smooth, like it was on a track. That was when the fear really kicked in. It didn't feel random. It felt like it knew I was there. I reached for my phone out of habit, but it was dead. I'd charged it before leaving, so that didn't make sense. I hadn't even used it all day. I remember hitting the power button over and over like that was going to help. Then the lights stopped spinning, just froze in place. I don't remember falling asleep. I wasn't even tired. My heart was pounding, my mind racing. But the next thing I remember is waking up in my car. It was parked on the shoulder of a paved road, not the dirt track I'd come in on. The sun was just coming up. My mouth was dry, my eyes were gritty, and my head hurt like I'd been hung over. I was in the driver's seat, engine off, keys in the ignition. My boots were on, even though I'd taken them off before bed. My pack was on the passenger seat, zipped up. My sleeping bag was stuffed into the back. I didn't understand what I was looking at. I didn't remember breaking down camp, let alone driving anywhere. I didn't remember getting in the car. I didn't remember any road like the one I was on. I got out and looked around. No landmarks I recognized, just desert stretching in every direction. When I checked my GPS, it showed I was nearly 9 miles from where I'd set up camp. Not in a straight line either. I'd have had to drive through some rough terrain to get where I was. I drove back toward the area where I thought my site had been. It took me a while. I had to retrace my route from memory, but I eventually found the clearing. It looked wrong. Not like someone had broken camp, but like nothing had ever been there. The ground wasn't disturbed, no fire ring, no marks from tent stakes. No footprints, even though I knew I'd walked back and forth a bunch while setting up. I searched around for a while, looked behind bushes, checked the little dry wash nearby, even climbed a low ridge to see if maybe I'd camped in the wrong spot. But nothing. It was like I'd never been there. I started getting this crawling feeling like I was being watched. No reason for it. Just that skin-prickling sense that something was nearby, even though I couldn't see anything. I got back in the car and locked the doors without really thinking about it. When I checked my phone again, it powered on like nothing had happened. Full charge, no missed calls, no weird glitches. The time was right, the date was right, but there were no photos. I always take a few when I'm camping. Sunset shots, campfire, gear setup. But the last photo was from the gas station I'd stopped at on the way in. No evidence I'd ever set foot at that campsite. I made it back to Moab and sat in a diner parking lot for an hour, trying to wrap my head around it. I kept checking my phone for something I'd missed. Maybe I'd uploaded the photos and forgot, but there was nothing. No tent in the trunk, no camp stove, no food, just my sleeping bag and pack, like I'd been car camping the whole time. I even checked myself over for scratches, sunburn, anything that might tell me I'd been outside. Nothing. Just a dull ache in my arms and neck, like I'd slept in a weird position. That night, back at my place, I had trouble sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that ring of lights. Perfect circle, spinning slowly, not making a sound, just hanging there like it was waiting for something. I haven't been camping since. I've been hiking alone for years. It's my thing, really. The quiet of the woods, the solitude of a long trek, far from the noise of city life, nothing beats it. That's what made me take the trip to the park that day. It wasn't my first time there, and I was looking forward to a long, peaceful walk along the river trail. But I can't explain it. Something felt different about that day. The weather had been odd that morning. There was a strange stillness in the air. But I didn't think much of it. It wasn't until I was well into my hike, just past the old trail markers, that the feeling started to settle in. It wasn't just the air, it was the whole place. The trees seemed quieter than usual. Even the river seemed to be running slower, almost as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I had been walking for a few hours when I reached a part of the trail I hadn't seen before. The path veered down to a small, secluded part of the riverbank where the trees crowded in closer and everything felt a little more enclosed. The water was clear, the kind of clear you don't see in many places. It was a spot I would have passed by without thinking, but something drew me closer. Maybe it was the perfect spot to sit down and rest for a while. I'd barely taken a few steps toward the river when I noticed something strange. There was a figure sitting at the water's edge, just ahead of me. At first, I thought it was someone else, another hiker, maybe someone who had taken the same trail, but the closer I got, the more I realized how wrong I was. This person wasn't human. It was sitting still, almost like it was waiting for something, just watching the river. At first, I couldn't make out any details. It was like a silhouette blurred by the trees and the shadows. But as I got closer, everything about it started to become clearer. It wasn't like anything I had ever seen. The figure was tall, though not in a way that felt unnatural. Its posture was rigid but calm. It was sitting cross-legged by the riverbank, staring at the water in front of it. I couldn't see its face clearly, but there was something about it that made the hairs on my neck stand up. The way the figure was dressed, or rather how its body seemed to be covered, wasn't fabric or any material I could recognize. It shimmered, like the light was bending around it. It almost looked like the figure was part of the landscape itself, blending in with the surroundings. I stopped dead in my tracks. For a moment, I thought about turning around and heading back down the trail, but my legs wouldn't move. I just stood there, staring at it. I knew it was wrong to stare, but I couldn't look away. My mind raced, wondering what I was looking at, but a strange calmness washed over me, almost like I was being hypnotized by the stillness of the scene. And then it did something. The figure, this thing, moved its head. Not like it had just noticed me, but more like it was acknowledging my presence. I froze, my heart racing in my chest. The air felt thick, heavy, like I was holding my breath without realizing it. That's when it happened. The thing, it spoke to me. Not with words, not out loud, but in my mind. A presence, an understanding. It was like it had been waiting for me to approach, like it knew I was coming. I could hear its thoughts, or at least I could feel them. They weren't human thoughts, but somehow they felt familiar, like the way you can just tell when someone is staring at you, even if you can't see them. It didn't speak in any language I could understand, but it didn't need to. The message was simple and unmistakable. Something is coming. I stood there, utterly still, as the sense of urgency washed over me. The figure didn't move, but the message grew stronger in my mind. It wasn't a warning in the way we usually think of warnings. There wasn't any fear in it, no panic. It wasn't threatening. It was just a fact, a statement, like telling someone it's going to rain. And then, without another movement, the figure turned its gaze back to the river. I didn't know what to do, what to say, or even how to feel. Part of me wanted to ask what it meant, but I knew I wasn't supposed to. I wasn't supposed to speak. I just had to understand what it had told me. Before I could take another step, it happened again. Only this time, I didn't hear it in my mind. I felt it. The ground beneath me trembled, just slightly, like something far off was shifting. The air grew thick again, this time colder, heavier. It felt like the world was holding its breath, just like the forest had been earlier that morning. The figure's presence faded, and I felt a strange pull in my chest. It wasn't physical, but it felt like I was being gently tugged, like the earth itself was trying to get my attention. The figure was still there, but I knew it was time to leave. Something was coming. I turned and walked away from the riverbank, but I didn't want to take my eyes off the creature. I couldn't explain it, but I knew it wasn't a being from this world. It wasn't human. It wasn't like anything I'd ever read about, not in science fiction or in the folklore I had learned over the years. But I also knew that it wasn't dangerous. It didn't want to hurt me. It had only wanted to share its warning, and now that it had, it was done. As I walked back down the trail, my mind was racing. What had it meant? What was coming? I didn't know, but there was a quiet certainty that I couldn't shake. There was no urgency in its words, no panic, but the message was unmistakable. Something was coming. When I finally made it back to the main trail, I looked over my shoulder, half expecting to see the figure still sitting there, but it was gone. The forest was calm again, the air lighter. It was like nothing had ever happened. But I knew something was wrong. I didn't know how I knew, but I knew. I don't know if anyone else would have believed me if I'd told them about it. I don't know if anyone would have understood. But that night I couldn't sleep. The message kept echoing in my mind. Something was coming. The next day, I found out. The local news reported it. A landslide in the nearby mountains. A massive one. A whole section of the trail had been wiped out. The damage was extensive. No one was hurt, thank God, but the destruction was worse than anything anyone had anticipated. I don't know if the creature was warning me about the landslide or if it was something else entirely. I'm not sure what it meant when it said, "Something is coming," but I don't think it was just about the landslide. It didn't feel like just an ordinary disaster. I haven't been back to that trail since. I don't think I'll go back. Maybe I was meant to see that creature. Maybe I wasn't, but I'll never forget the look in its eyes or the message it gave me. Something was coming, and whatever it was, I wasn't ready for it. I had always gone night fishing on the lake. It's something I've done for as long as I can remember, and there's a peace to it, especially when you're alone on the water under the stars. I was never the kind of person to get spooked easily, but this night, it was different. It was about 2 years ago, early in the summer. I had the whole lake to myself, no other boats out there, just the soft lapping of water against the hull and the occasional splash of a fish breaking the surface. I don't usually stay out this late, but the fishing had been good and I figured I'd push it a little longer before heading back. The moon was full, casting silver streaks across the water, and the air had that crisp coolness that only comes at night by a lake. I had my lantern beside me and a radio playing softly. The only sounds I could hear were the croaking of frogs and the occasional hoot of an owl. Nothing unusual about it. Nothing at all. It was just after midnight when I started to feel a little off. I couldn't explain why. It wasn't the usual quiet calm that I was used to. It was like something was pressing on the edges of my thoughts. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was just tired, but then I heard something that made me freeze. At first, it was just a soft hum, almost like a distant engine or maybe a boat far away, but there was something off about it. It wasn't the usual sound you'd hear on the lake. This wasn't a sound you could place, not one you could even recognize. It didn't seem to be coming from any direction either. It was just there, filling the air, vibrating through the water. I looked around, trying to spot anything unusual. The fog had started to roll in from the shore, creeping in thick tendrils, but there was still enough light from the moon to see the immediate area. Nothing. I figured it was just my imagination and went back to fishing. But the hum wouldn't stop. It got louder, more constant, and that's when I saw them. At first, it was just a couple of faint lights. Small, round, like lanterns, but they were floating on the surface of the water, and there was no way to explain them. They weren't boats or reflections. I thought maybe I was seeing things, or maybe there were some other fishermen out there with strange lights. But no. I stared harder. The lights were hovering just above the water, moving slowly around my boat in a perfect circle. At first, I thought they were fireflies or something similar, but they were too steady, too intentional. They didn't flicker or fly erratically like insects. They moved as though they were being controlled, and the closer I looked, the stranger they seemed. There were 3 of them, then 4, then 5, each one floating in a small arc around me just above the surface. They didn't make a sound, just hovered, their lights glowing a soft blue that cut through the mist. My heart started to race. I tried to tell myself they were just some sort of natural phenomenon. Maybe some kind of bioluminescent algae or something, but deep down, I knew that wasn't it. These things were too deliberate. I reached for my flashlight, wanting to get a better look, but when I flicked it on, it did nothing. The beam didn't even cut through the fog like it usually did. It was as if the light wasn't allowed to reach them. The orbs just continued floating, moving slowly in their silent, calculated pattern. A cold shiver ran down my spine, and that's when I realized I wasn't alone. They weren't just floating above the water. They were studying it, watching it. The way they moved, the way they rotated around me, it was as if they were mapping something far beyond what I could understand. One of the orbs dipped lower, close enough that I could almost feel the air around it shift. It wasn't close enough to touch, but I felt a strange pressure, like the atmosphere was changing. Then, in an instant, it darted back up into the air, and I swear the air felt thicker. The hum I'd been hearing grew louder again, like something deep beneath the water had just awakened. It wasn't the water itself, but something below it. Something that had been there for longer than I'd realized. I'm not proud of how fast my heart started to pound, but I wasn't about to sit there and wait for whatever these things were to show their full hand. I started pulling in my fishing line, trying to act normal, trying to ignore the fear gnawing at the pit of my stomach. I told myself, just get the gear in, get the boat turned around, and leave. But the orbs were faster than I could react. They moved in closer, surrounding my boat now, and I could see them more clearly. They weren't like any lights I'd seen before. They didn't just glow, they pulsed rhythmically, and as I watched them, the hairs on my neck stood up. They weren't just lights, they were something more, like probes, tiny hovering devices that were more alive than I had ever expected anything from the water to be. It was then that I saw it, just beneath the surface of the water, barely visible under the moon's light. Something massive was moving. I could see the faint outline of a shape, like a shadow deep in the lake, undulating and shifting. The orbs seemed to react to it, as if they were communicating with whatever was down there. They'd dart toward the surface of the water, circle around for a moment, then move back. It was like they were studying the movement, the behavior, and the flow of whatever lay beneath. I didn't want to stick around to find out what it was. Without thinking, I grabbed my paddle and started pushing the boat forward. My hands were shaking, my mind racing with everything I had just seen. The orbs followed, their lights bobbing and shifting as they continued their silent surveillance. It was like they were never going to leave. But then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, the orbs started to pull away. One by one, they drifted back into the fog, further and further until they were swallowed up by the mist. The hum started to fade with them, and just like that, the night was quiet again. My boat felt lighter. The weight of their presence lifted, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had just been set in motion, something bigger than me or anything I could understand. I didn't look back after that. I rowed as fast as I could, heading straight for the shore, the paddles cutting through the water with urgency. When I finally made it back to the dock, I didn't even bother to unload my gear. I just wanted to get off the lake. The next day, I went back to the spot, but there was nothing. No orbs, no strange hum. The water was calm, the air was still. It was like the whole thing had never happened. But I knew what I saw. I knew what I felt. Those things, they weren't of this world, and I wasn't supposed to see them. But I did. And now, every time I go back to that lake, I can't shake the feeling that they're still out there, watching, waiting. I don't fish at night anymore, and I haven't told anyone else what I saw. I don't think they'd believe me. But I know what happened, and I know that something out there in the dark water is being watched. It was studying the lake, and I was just a tiny part of it.